The following story is a translated and adapted conversation, recounting supernatural experiences from around the world. This content is intended for entertainment purposes only. Listen with an open mind and enjoy the thrill of the unknown. The content in this video is purely for entertainment. Viewer discretion is advised. If you are easily frightened, be prepared some stories might just send chills down your spine. If you're ready, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and immerse yourself in the world of the unexplained.
It was a rainy night. The kite where the sound of the rain hitting the windshield drowned out anything else. I was driving, navigating the slick roads with caution, while I got a notification on my phone, a new ride request. I pulled over to the curb and waited, my windshield wipers swishing back and forth as I scanned the street for any sign of my passenger, and then, out of the darkness, I saw him, a man standing on the corner, his hood pulled up against the rain. He climbed into the back seat without a word, his movements smooth and practiced. I greeted him with a polite smile, but he didn't return it, his gaze fixed on something outside the window. We troned silence for a while, the only sound the steady rhythm of the rain on the roof of the car. But as we neared his destination, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I glanced in the rear view mirror and saw him fidgeting in his seat, his hands clenched into fists in his lap. I asked him if everything was okay, but he just nodded curtly and looked away as we pulled up to his destination. He suddenly asked me to keep driving, his voice low and urgent. I hesitated, unsure of what to do, but before I could respond, he reached forward and grabbed the steering wheel, his crib-like iron. I tried to wrestle control back from him, but he was too strong, his hands like vice grips, as he forced the car off the road and into the darkness. Beyond, I shouted for help, but the rain drowned out my cries, the sound of the storm swallowing them whole. I struggled against him, my heart pounding in my chest like a jackhammer as we current off the road and into the wilderness beyond. And then just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw it, a glimmer of light up ahead, like a beacon in the darkness. With a surge of adrenaline, I threw open the door and leaped out into the night, my heart pounding in my chest like a jackhammer. I ran as fast as my legs were tearing me, the sound of his slaughter ringing in my ears like a taunt. But I didn't stop, I couldn't stop. I ran until I thought my lungs would burst, until I collapsed onto the ground in exhaustion and despair. But even then, I didn't give up. I crawled, I stumbled, I dragged myself forward inch by agonizing inch, until finally, mercifully, I reached the safety of the road. Once more I fly down the first passing car. I saw my breath coming in like a gasps as I begged them for help. They listened in horror as I read my ordeal, their eyes wi with disbelief. They drove me to the nearest police station, where I told my story to the authorities in painstaking detail. They promised to do everything in their power to find the man who had attacked me and bring him to justice. And though I knew it would be a long and difficult road ahead, I felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time since that fateful encounter on that rainy night, I was in my apartment, just going about my business, cooking dinner. Like any other night, the sizzle of the pan and the aroma spices filled the air, creating a cozy atmosphere. But then, out of nowhere, I heard a knock at the door. It was unexpected, and I couldn't imagine who it could be at this hour. It got the better of me, so I cautiously made my way to the door and peered through the peephole. There was no one there, just the empty hallway bathed in the dim light of the corridor. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should open the door or just ignore it, but before I could make up my mind, there was another knock, louder, this time more urgent, with a sense of uneased knowing in my gut. I reluctantly turned the handle and pulled the door open, and that's when I saw a small, nondescript package sitting on the welcome mat with my name scrolled across the front in neat handwriting. There was no return address, no indication of who it could be. From my heart pounding in my chest, I quickly scooped up the package and closed the door behind me, feeling a sense of foreboding wash over me. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should just throw the package away without opening it. But my curiosity got the better of me, and with trembling hands, I tore open the wrapping. What I found inside made my blood run cold. A severed hand, pale and lifeless, staring up at me with vacant eyes. I recoiled in horror, dropping the package to the floor as if it were on fire. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was this some kind of sick joke? Or was it something far more sinister? Panic set in, and I scrambled to my feet, desperate to get away from the grisly sight before me. But as I turned to run, I heard a sound behind me, a soft with thud, like something heavy hitting the floor. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears, as I realized I was now alone in the apartment with trembling hands. I reached for the nearest object I could find, a kitchen knife, and slowly turned to face whatever horror awaited me. But as I looked around the room, there was nothing there, just the eerie silence of the empty apartment. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the adrenaline coursing through my veins, my senses on high alert. But no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone or something was lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike, with a sense of dread creeping over me. I made my way to the door, determined to get out of there as quickly as possible. But as I reached for the handle, I heard it again, that soft thud coming from somewhere behind me. I spun around, knife it already, but once again there was nothing there. I knew I had to get out of there to escape before whatever was lurking in the darkness could find me. With a surge of adrenaline, I threw open the door and bolted into the hallway, the echo of my footsteps ringing in my ears as I raced down the corridor. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of the street outside, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked back at the apartment building, half expecting to see someone or something following me out into the night. But the building stood silent and still, giving no indication of the horror that had unfolded within its walls. I stumbled down the street, my mind reeling with fear and confusion, wondering what could have driven someone to send me such a package. And as I looked back at the apartment building one last time, I made a silent vow and never turned to leave behind whatever darkness lurked within those walls. In the end, I may never know who sent me that package or why, but one thing's for certain: I'll never forget the terror that gripped me in that moment, the fear of the unknown that lurked just beyond my doorstep. I was driving down this empty highway, miles of nothing but desert on either side. My car had broken down and I was stranded in the middle of nowhere. I was starting to panic, wondering how I was going to get out of this mess, and then out of nowhere this truck pulls up beside me. The driver rolls down his window and asks if I need a lift. I was hesitant at first, not wanting to get into a car with a stranger, but I didn't really have much of a choice. So I called into the truck, grateful for the ride. The driver seemed friendly enough, making small talk as we drove deeper into the countryside. But as we got further and further from civilization, something didn't feel right. The driver kept glancing at me out of the corner of his eye, like he was sizing me up or something. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But then he started asking these weird questions, like if I lived alone, if anyone knew I was out here, stuff like that. I started to feel this sense of unease, like maybe I'd made a mistake getting into this guy's truck. But before I could say anything, he suddenly pulled off onto this dirt road miles from the nearest town. I asked him where we were going, but he just laughed and said he had a surprise for me. I felt my stomach drop, like I was in some kind of horror movie. I tried to keep calm, telling myself that maybe he was just taking a shortcut or something. But as we drove deeper into the countryside, I started to realize that something was seriously wrong. The road got narrower and narrower until it was little more than a dirt track winding through the desert, and then just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the truck started to slow down. I asked the driver what was going on, but he didn't answer. He just kept driving, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. And then, out of nowhere, he stopped the truck where we're in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but desert for miles in every direction. I knew I had to get out of there. But before I could make a move, the driver turned to me with a sickening smile on his face. He said something about how he liked to take his time with his victims, how he enjoyed the chase, and then before I could react, he lunged at me, grabbing me by the throat. I fought back with everything I had, screaming for help as he tried to drag me out of the truck. But he was too strong, too determined to see his sick plans through, and then just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I heard the sound of approaching headlights. It was another car coming down the road towards us. The driver must have heard it too, because he suddenly let go of me and jumped back into his truck, speeding off into the night. I stumbled out of the truck, shaking with fear and adrenaline. The driver of the other car pulled up beside me, asking if I was okay. I told him what had happened, and he offered to give me a ride to the nearest town. I was too shaken up to refuse, grateful for the chance to get away from that nightmare. As we drove off into the night, leaving the desert in the memory of that twisted truck driver behind, I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if that other car hadn't come along when it did. But one thing's for sure: I'll never forget the terror I felt that night, stranded on that desolate stretch of highway, and I'll never take rides from strangers again. I was out there, just me and the jungle. It was TS, like every step I took was into another world. I was searching for something. I don't know what, just chasing that feeling of adventure. Then I stumbled upon this clearing, and in the middle of it was this village. It was like something out of a history book, all huts and thatched roofs. I couldn't believe it. I heard rumors about hidden tribes in the jungle, but I never thought I'd actually find one. I approached the village cautiously, not wanting to startle anyone. But as soon as I got close, the village came pouring out of their huts, staring at me like I was some kind of alien. I tried to communicate with them, but we didn't speak the same language. It was frustrating, like trying to talk to a brick wall, but it wasn't about to give up. I needed to know more about these people, about their way of life. So I stuck around trying to pick up on their customs and rituals, and that's when things started to get weird. I noticed these strange symbols painted on the walls of their huts, symbols that I couldn't make heads or tails of. I tried asking the villagers about them, but they just gave me these blank stares, like they didn't know I was talking about. It was like they were hiding something for me, something dark and sinister. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that there was something lurking in the shadows, just out of sight. But every time I turned around, there was nothing there, just a jungle stretching out in every direction. I started to feel like I was losing my mind, like the jungle was playing tricks on me. But then one night, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. I was wandering through the village trying to clear my head when I heard this chanting coming from the center of town. I followed the sound, and that's when I saw them. The villagers gathered around this bonfire, chanting and swaying like something of a cult. I watched in horror as they started to dance there, movements becoming more and more frenzied. And then I saw it in the center of the circle. There was this thing. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, all twisted and grotesque. I wanted to run, to get as far away from that village as possible, but something held me back, some morbid curiosity that I couldn't shake. And then the thing spoke. Its voice was like nails on a chalkboard, creating an inhuman. It spoke in a language I couldn't understand, but the villagers seemed to hang on its every word. I watched in horror as they offered its ill sacrifices, animals and other things. and then they turned their eyes on me like I was next in line. I knew I had to get out of there, and fast. So I turned and ran, not stopping, until I was deep in the jungle, far away from the cursed village. I don't know what I stumbled upon out there in the jungle, and I don't think I want to know. All I know is that I'll never forget the terror. I felt that night the feeling of being watched by something ancient and evil, and I pray that I never have to experience anything like it again. It was a typical evening in my apartment, and I was sitting in my living room practicing my guitar. For an upcoming gig, the notes were flowing smoothly, and I was lost in the music, when suddenly I heard something strange at first. It was just a faint melody, barely audible over the sound of my playing. But as I listened closer, I realized that it was coming from the walls themselves, as if someone were playing a piano or a violin in the room next door. Confused and intrigued, I sat down my guitar and got up to investigate. I followed the sound to the wall at the far end of the room, or it seemed to be the loudest, and pressed my ear against the plaster. Sure enough, the melody was coming from inside the wall, echoing softly in the confined space. It was eerie and unsettling, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do next. But curiosity got the better of me, and I began to search for a way to access the hidden room. After a few minutes of careful exploration, I found a loose panel in the wall that I was able to pry open with some effort. Inside, I found myself staring into a small, dimly lit room filled with musical instruments of all kinds of pianos, violins, cellos, and more. It was like something out of a train, or perhaps a nightmare. But what caught my attention the most was the figure standing in the center of the room, playing a haunting melody on a grand piano. It was translucent and ghostly, its features blurred and indistinct, but there was no mistaking the sound of its music. I stood frozen in shock and disbelief, unable to tear my eyes away from the scene before me. The figure seemed oblivious to my presence, lost in its own world, as it played on the music, filling the room with an otherworldly beauty. But as the melody continued to play, I felt a growing sense of unease wash over me. There was something undeniably sinister about the whole situation, something that made my skin crawl and my heart race with fear. I knew that I should leave, that I should run as far away from that room as possible, but I couldn't bring myself to move. It was as if I were rooted to the spot, held captive by the ghostly figure and its hypnotic music. And then suddenly the figure stopped playing. Inter turned to face me, its empty eyes pouring into mine with a look of cold intensity. For a moment we stood there, locked in a silent stare down and there. I felt a chill run down my spine, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished into thin air, leaving me alone in the darkness of the hidden loom. I stumbled backwards, my heart pounding in my chest, and scrambled to escape. Before I returned, I raced out of the room and back into my apartment, slamming the door shut behind me and leaning against it, gasping for breath. I didn't know what had just happened or what the figure had wanted from me, but I knew that I never wanted to experience anything like it again. From that day on, I avoided the corner of my apartment like the plague, too afraid to even go near it for fear of what I might find. And though I tried to convince myself that it had all been a hallucination, a trick of the mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been all too real. But no matter how hard I tried to forget, the memory of that ghostly figure and its haunting melody continued to haunt me. I was on assignment, traveling through the deep south to sample the cuisine of local diners for my food column. As a food critic, I prided myself on my adventurous palate, always willing to try new and exotic dishes, but nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered at that roadside restaurant. The place seemed innocent enough, from the outside a quaint little diner with a faded sign and a front porch lined with rocking chairs. But as soon as I stepped inside, I knew that something was off. The air was heavy with the smell of grease and spices, and the few patrons hunched over their plates seemed to cast furtive glances in my direction undeterred. I took a seat at the counter and ordered the daily special, eager to see what culinary delights the Deep South had to offer. But as I waited for my food to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When my meal finally arrived, I dug in with gusto, eager to satisfy my hunger after a long day on the road. But as I chewed, a strange taste filled my mouth, something metallic and bitter that made my stomach churn. I pushed my plate away, suddenly feeling queasy, and glanced around the diner, searching for the source of the strange flavor. That's when I saw him, the owner of the restaurant, lurking behind the counter with a sinister gleam in his eye. Something about the way he looked at me sent a shiver down my spine, and I knew in that moment that I needed to get out of there and fast. But as I made to leave, the owner stepped in front of me, blocking my path with a cold smile. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice dripping with malice. "But you haven't finished your meal yet." I tried to brush past him, but he grabbed hold of my arm with surprising strength, his like a vice around my wrist. Panic surged through me as I struggled to break free. But it was no use. I was trapped at the mercy of this sinister stranger. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I heard the sound of approaching footsteps. With a surge of relief, I turned to see a group of locals standing in the doorway, their faces grim and determined. "We've been looking for you," one of them said, his voice filled with urgency. "You need to get out of here now." With their help, I managed to escape the restaurant, my heart pounding in my chest as I fled to safety. So I got to share this crazy thing that happened to me. I work as a social worker, and one day I had to drive out to this remote farmhouse to check on a family in trouble. Seemed routine enough, you know. Anyway, I hop in my car and head out there. The drive was long, and the farmhouse was out in the middle of nowhere. I remember feeling kind of uneasy as I got closer, like something just wasn't right. I finally pull up to the house, though my heart drops. It's quiet, too quiet, and there are signs of a struggle. Everywhere broken furniture, stuff knocked over, you name it. I start to get this sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, like I've stumbled into something way worse than I bargained for. But I pushed those thoughts aside and try to focus on what I need to do. I get out of my car and cautiously approach the house, the doors wide open, swinging gently in the bridge. I call out, but there's no response, just silence. I step inside, and that's when things start to get really messed up. The place is a wreck, like a tornado came through or something. And there's blood, lots of it, splattered all over the walls and floor. My heart's racing now, and I can feel the panic rising in my chest. I know I should call the cops, but something's holding me back. Maybe it's the fear of what I might find, or maybe it's just shock. I start to search the house, calling out for anyone who might still be there. But there's nobody. Just me and the eerie silence. Then out of nowhere, I hear this faint sound coming from upstairs, like someone crying. My blood runs cold as I slowly make my way up the stairs, my heart pounding in my ears. I reach the top and followed the sound to one of the bedrooms, and that's when I see her, a young girl huddled in the corner, tears streaming down her face. I rush over to her, asking if she's okay, but she's too scared to even speak. I try to comfort her as best I can, promising that everything's going to be all right. But deep down, I know it's not. I can feel it in my bones. Whatever happened here, it's not over yet. I scoop the girl up in my arms and make a run for it, not stopping until we're far away from the godforsaken place. I call the cops and tell them everything, praying that they'll be able to make sense of the nightmare I just stumbled into. They arrive soon after, and I hand the girl over to them, feeling like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. But as I watch them drive away, I can't shake the feeling that this is far from over. I may have escaped with my life, but the horrors of that farmhouse will haunt me forever, and I can only hope that whoever did this pays for their crimes, so that no one else has to suffer the way that poor family did. It was late at night, and my girlfriend and I were driving on our way home as we rounded a bend in the road. Our headlights illuminated a scene that sent a chill down my spine, a makeshift roadblock manned by a group of men, their faces obscured by dark masks. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowed the car to a stop, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. I could feel my girlfriend's hand trembling in mine as we stared at the mass figures blocking our path. We were completely at the mercy of a group of strangers whose intentions were unknown to us for a moment. There was silence, broken only by the sound of our breath coming in shallow gasps. And then one of the masked men stepped forward, his voice low and menacing as he spoke to us through the closed window of our car. He demanded that we hand over our belongings, threatening us with violence. If we refused, my mind raced as I tried to think of a way out of the situation. But it was no use. We were trapped with nowhere to run and no one to help us with trembling hands. I reached for my wallet and phone, handing them over to the masked men as my girlfriend watched in silence beside me. I could feel the weight of their gaze bearing down on us, their eyes pouring into our souls, with a chilling intensity that sent shivers down my spine as the masked men disappeared into the darkness, leaving us alone on the deserted highway. I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. We had narrowly escaped a terrifying encounter, but the memory of that night would haunt me for years to come. So me and my wife were on this road trip, just trying to get away for a bit and enjoy some time together. We've been driving for a while, and everything was going great until we noticed this truck behind us. At first, we didn't think much of it. I mean, it's not unusual to see other vehicles on the road, right? But as we kept driving, we started to realize that this truck wasn't just following us, it was tailgating us, getting closer and closer with each passing mile. I tried to shake it off, speeding up a bit and then slowing down, but no matter what I did, the truck stayed right on our tail, like it was glued to our bumper or something. My wife started to get really freaked out, and I have to admit, I was starting to feel pretty nervous myself. I mean, who follows someone like that, especially out in the middle of nowhere? We decided to pull off the highway at the next exit, hoping to lose the truck in the maze of side streets and back roads, but no matter where we went, the truck was right there behind us, like it was playing some twisted game of cat and mouse. By this point, my heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the panic rising in my throat. I didn't know what this person wanted from us, but I knew we had to get away from them, and fast. We kept driving, trying to put as much distance between us and the truck as possible. My wife was on the phone with the police. But out here in the middle of nowhere, it felt like we were on our own. Finally, after what felt like hours of tense silence, we spotted a gas station up ahead. We pulled in, hoping that maybe the presence of other people would scare off our pursuer. But as we got out of the car and headed inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the truck parked out front, but it was nowhere to be seen. We hurried inside, trying to act casual. Even though every instinct was screaming at us to run, my wife went to use the restroom while I paid for the gas, and I tried to keep an eye on the door just in case. But when my wife came out of the restroom, she was pale. As a ghost, she whispered something to me, her voice barely audible over the sound of the cashier ringing up our purchase. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized what she was saying. The truck, it was parked outside waiting for us. We were trapped with nowhere to run and no one to help us. I quickly paid for the gas and grabbed my wife's hand, pulling her towards the door. We had to get out of there before Whoever was in that truck caught up to us. We burst out of the gas station and ran to our car, throwing ourselves inside and slamming the door shut behind us. I started the engine and peeled out of the parking lot, not caring about the screeching tires or the startled looks of the people inside. As we sped away from the gas station, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the truck pulling out onto the road behind us, its headlights shining like the eyes of some predatory beast. But this time, we weren't going to let it catch us. We drove faster than we ever had before, pushing our car to its limits. As we raced towards the safety of the nearest town, and finally, after what felt like an eternity of terror, we saw the lights of civilization up ahead. We pulled into the town, breathing of relief as we left our pursuer behind us. We called the police as soon as we arrived, reporting the truck and giving them as much information as we could, but by the time they arrived at the gas station, the truck was long gone, disappearing into the night like it had never been there at all. We never did find out who was driving that truck or what they wanted from us. But one thing's for sure, we'll never forget the terror of being followed, hunted like animals on the open road, and we'll never take another road trip without looking over our shoulders, wondering if our pursuer is still out there waiting for us to let our guard down once again. I was home alone in my suburban house, enjoying the quiet solitude after the whirlwind of our wedding day. My husband had gone out of town for a business trip, leaving me to settle into our new home on my own. At first I relished the chance to have some time to myself, but that all changed when I received a series of disturbing photographs in the mail. The first photograph arrived on a bright, sunny morning. It was a picture of me standing in the kitchen making breakfast. At first, I dismissed it as a strange coincidence, but when the second photograph arrived later that day, I knew something was wrong this time. The photograph showed me sitting on the couch watching TV. It was taken from outside the window, and I could see the reflection of the camera in the glass. My heart raced as I realized that someone had been watching me, capturing my every move. Without my knowledge, I called the police, but without any evidence of who was sending the photographs, there was little they could do. I tried to go about my day as normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched the next day. Another photograph arrived. This time, it showed me getting ready for bed, taken from inside the house. I felt sick to my stomach as I realized that whoever was sending the photographs had been inside my home. I searched the house from top to bottom, but I found no sign of an intruder. It was as if they had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the eerie photographs as evidence of their presence. As the days passed, the photographs became more and more frequent. They showed me going about my daily routine, cooking, cleaning, sleeping, each one a reminder that someone was watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I became paranoid, jumping at every sound, constantly checking the locks on the doors and windows. I stopped leaving the house altogether, afraid of what might happen if I ventured outside. But no matter how careful I was, the photographs kept coming. Each one seemed to tar me, mocking my attempts to uncover the identity of the person behind them. I reached out to friends and family for help, but no one had any answers. It was as if I was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. Then one day, I received a final photograph. It was a close-up of my face taken while I slept. The flash from the camera illuminated the darkness of the room, casting long shadows across the walls. I knew then that I had to confront whoever was behind the photographs, no matter the cost, with a sense of determination. I gathered my courage and ventured outside for the first time in weeks. As I made my way down the street, I felt a sense of awe wash over me. It was as if that the eyes of the entire neighborhood were watching me, judging me for my perceived weakness, but I pushed through the fear, determined to uncover the truth. I knocked on doors, questioned neighbors, and searched for any clue that might lead me to the person responsible for the photographs, and then just when I was about to give up hope, I found it a small, nondescript house at the end of the street. It was the last place I had expected to find answers, but something about it threw me and compelling me to investigate further. I approached the house cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest, as I reached out to knock on the door. But before I could make contact, it swung open, revealing a figure standing in the shadows. It was my husband at first. I couldn't believe my eyes. How could he be behind the photographs? But as he explained, it all began to make sense. He had been struggling with mental health issues for months, feeling isolated and alone in our new home. The photographs were his way of reaching out, of trying to connect with me in his own twisted way. I was stunned, overwhelmed by a flood of conflicting emotions. Part of me was relieved to finally have an explanation for the strange occurrences, but another part of me was angry that he had kept the secret from me, angry that he had put me through such torment. But as we talked, I began to see things from his perspective. He was hurting, lost in a sea of darkness, with no lifeline to cling to, and in his desperation, he had turned to the only thing he knew: me. In the end, we both realized that we needed help to heal, help to move forward, help to rebuild our relationship from the ground up. And though the road ahead would be long and difficult, I knew that as long as we had each other, we could weather any storm that came our way. As we stood there in the doorway, bathed in the soft glow of the afternoon sun, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The nightmare was finally over, and we were free to begin anew. I was out hiking, solo, in the wilderness, surrounded by towering trees and the sounds of nature. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor. I've been walking for hours, enjoying the solitude and the beauty of the wilderness. As I trudged along the narrow trail, my eyes caught sight of something in the distance, an old abandoned cabin nestled among the trees. It looked like it had been there for years, forgotten by time, curiosity, Pete. I veered off the trail and made my way towards it. The cabin was weather-beaten and run down, but there was something strangely yawning about it. I pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside, but floorboards groaning beneath my weight. The interior was dark and musty, with dust motes dancing in the faint light filtering through the windows. It was clear that no one had lived here for a long time. I shivered suddenly, feeling a chill in the air. Despite the eerie atmosphere, I couldn't resist exploring further. I went through the rooms, running my fingers along the peeling wallpaper and cop-up covered furniture. It was like stepping back in time. As I made my way to the back of the cabin, I stumbled upon a troppo hidden beneath a threadbare rug. My heart skipped a beat as I lifted the rug and peered into the darkness below. With a shaky breath, I descended into the cellar, the wooden steps creaking beneath my feet. The air was thick and musty, and a sense of unease settled over me like a heavy blanket. The cellar was small and cramped, with shelves lining the walls, filled with jars of preserved food and dusty old books. But as I scanned the room, my eyes landed on something that made my blood run cold. A makeshift altar adorned with candles and strange symbols. My heart raced as I realized I wasn't alone. Someone had been here, someone who practiced dark rituals in this remote cabin in the woods. Panic surged through me as I turned to leave. But before I could reach the stairs, I heard a sound behind me, a low gut crawl that froze me in place. I spun around, heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw him, a man emerging from the shadows, his eyes wild with madness. I stumbled backward, my mind racing with fear. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips as he advanced towards me, a sinister smile playing on his lips. I knew I had to get out of there too, escaped before it was too late. With every ounce of strength I had left, I turned and bolted up the stairs, my heart pounding in my ears. I burst through the door and into the fading light of the setting. Sun sprinting through the forest as fast as my legs could carry me, branches clawed. My skin and roots threatened to trip me up, but I didn't stop until I reached the safety of the trail. I didn't dare look back. As I ran, the terror fueling my every step, it felt like hours before I finally emerged from the trees, gasping for breath and covered in sweat. But even as I collapsed on the ground, my heart still pounding with fear, I knew that I had escaped. I had survived the horror that lurked in the depths of the forest, and I would never forget the terror of that abandoned cabin in the woods. I'm a survivalist, someone who thrives on the challenge of the great outdoors. So when I decided to embark on a solo camping trip deep in the wilderness, I knew I was in for an adventure. But as I set up camp in a secluded clearing, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The forest seemed eerily quiet, as if the very trees were holding their breath in anticipation of something sinister. And then, just as I was settling in for the night, I heard the sound of voices echoing through the trees, low and guttural like the crawls of wild animals. Panic surged through me as I realized I was now alone in the wilderness, with my heart pounding in my chest. I crouched down low and listened intently, trying to make out what the voices were saying, but their words were muffled and indistinct, carried away on the wind. Before I could decipher them, I knew I had to act fast if I wanted to avoid detection. With trembling hands, I doused the fire and packed up my gear, moving silently through the trees like a shadow in the night. But just when I thought I had escaped the poachers' notice, I stumbled upon their camp hidden deep in the forest. My blood ran cold as I caught sight of them, a group of men armed to the teeth with rifles and machetes. Their faces obscured by the darkness. Panic surged through me as I realized I was outnumbered. I knew I had to find a way to evade capture and make it out of the forest alive, with adrenaline coursing through my veins. I ducked behind a tree and waited for the perfect moment to make my move. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through me as I waited for the poachers to pass by. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I caught sight of something moving in the darkness, something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. It was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen before, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. As it prowled through the trees, panic surged through me as I realized that the poachers were not just hunting animals. They were hunting something far more dangerous, and I knew that if they caught sight of me, I would be next on their list. With every ounce of strength I had left, I pushed myself to my feet and raced through the forest, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the trees as I fled for my life. But the creature was hot on my trail, its crawls echoing through the darkness like a death nail. And then, just when I thought I couldn't want any longer, I stumbled upon a narrow ravine hidden deep in the heart of the forest, with no other options left. I leaped into the darkness and prayed that I would survive the fall. Miraculously, I landed safely at the bottom of the ravine, my body battered and bruised. But still alive, I lay there for what felt like hours, listening intently for any sign of danger. But the forest was eerily silent, as if the very trees were holding their breath in anticipation of what was to come. With trembling hands, I pushed myself to my feet and began to make my way out of the ravine and back to safety. And then finally I emerged from the darkness of the forest and into the light of day. Relief flooded through me as I realized that I had escaped the clutches of the poachers and the creature that hunted in their midst. I'm a truck driver hauling freight across the country on a regular basis. It's a lonely job, spending long hours on the road with nothing but the hum of the engine and the endless stretch of highway to keep me company. but I never expected my latest delivery to turn into a nightmare. It was late at night when I pulled into a US stop, the darkness swallowing the landscape like a thick blanket. I was tired and ready to call it a night, but I still had a long way to go before I reached my destination. As I climbed out of the cab and stretched my legs, I noticed a figure standing at the edge of the parking lot, a lone hitchhiker. Holding a sign that are west, I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should offer the stranger a ride. There was something off about him, something that sent a shiver down on my spine. But before I could make up my mind, the hitchhiker approached me. His eyes gleaming in the darkness. He was tall and gaunt, with a wild look about him that made my skin crawl. He asked for a ride, his voice low and raspy. I tried to refuse to tell him that I couldn't take passengers, but he wouldn't take no for an answer reluctantly. I agreed to give him a lift, hoping to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over me, but as he climbed into the cab and settled into the passenger seat, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As we drove down the deserted highway, the hitchhiker grew increasingly agitated, his movements jerky and erratic. He kept glancing out the window as if he were expecting something or someone to appear out of the darkness. I tried to make small talk to keep the atmosphere light and friendly, but the hitchhiker didn't seem interested in conversation. He just stared straight ahead, his eyes fixed on the road ahead with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, he pulled a knife from his pocket and pressed it against my throat. Panic surged through me. As I realized that I was in mortal danger, he demanded that I pull over, his voice low and menacing. I knew I had to act fast if I wanted to survive. With trembling hands, I reached for the emergency button on my dashboard, hoping to summon help before it was too late. But before I could press it, the hitchhiker launched at me, his knife slicing through the air with deadly precision. I managed to wrestle the knife away from him, but not before he landed. A blow to my shoulder pain shot for me as I fought to keep control of the truck, my vision swimming with adrenaline in fear. But even as I struggled to maintain control, the hitchhiker kept coming at me, his eyes filled with madness. I knew I had to get him out of the cab before he killed me with one final burst of strength. I slammed on the brakes and sent the truck skiing to a halt. The hitchhiker was thrown against the dashboard, giving me the opening I needed to push him out of the cab and onto the side of the road. As he lay there stunned and disoriented, I seized the opportunity to escape. I climbed out of the cabin, ran as fast as I could, putting as much distance between myself and the hitchhiker as possible. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw the lights of an approaching vehicle up ahead with renewed determination. I flagged them down and begged for help, my hand shaking with adrenaline and exhaustion. With their assistance, I was able to get to safety and receive medical attention for my injuries. It was a terrifying ordeal that I'll never forget, a reminder of the dangers that lurk in the darkness for those who dare to trust the wrong person. My wife and I were on a road trip, excited to explore new places and create memories together as newlyweds, but when our car broke down in the middle of nowhere, our adventure took a terrifying turn. We found ourselves stranded on a desolate stretch of countryside with nothing but empty fields stretching out in every direction. Panic started to set in as we realized just how isolated we were. We tried to call for help, but there was no signal on our phones. We were completely cut off from the outside world, with no way to contact anyone for assistance. As we waited for help to arrive, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. The air grew cold and still, and a sense of unease settled over us like a heavy blanket. And then, just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, we heard the sound of approaching footsteps. We turned to see a group of locals emerging from the darkness. their faces twisted into menacing sneers. We tried to reason with them to explain our situation and asked for help, but they only laughed and taunted us. It was clear that they had sinister intentions, and we knew we were in danger with mounting fear. We huddled together in the car, hoping that help would arrive soon, but the locals showed no signs of leaving their presence, a constant reminder of the peril we were in. As the night wore on, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. We could hear them whispering. Outside the car, their voices filled with malice and hatred, and then just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, they started to rock the car back and forth, pounding on the windows with their fists. We were trapped with no way to escape their relentless onslaught. Panic surged through us as we realized that we were at the mercy of these hostile strangers. We were completely helpless, with no one to turn to her assistance. But even in the face of certain death, we refused to give up hope with every ounce of strength we had left. We fought to survive, clinging to each other in the darkness. And then, just when we thought all hope was lost, we heard the sound of approaching headlights. Relief flooded through us as a car pulled up beside ours, its occupants stepping out to confront the hostile locals with their help. We were able to escape the terrifying ordeal and make our way to safety. But the memory of that harrowing night would haunt us for the rest of our lives, a stark reminder of the dangers that lure in the darkness. I worked a night shift at a local warehouse, and it's always a real relief to finally get home after a long night of work. But one night, as I returned to my apartment, exhausted and ready to collapse into bed, something happened that would haunt me for the rest of my days as I settled into my routine of unwinding after work. I heard a faint tapping coming from the window. At first I thought it was just the wind, or a tree branch brushing against the glass. But as the tapping continued, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. LLY. I made my way over to the window and peered outside, expecting to see nothing more than an overactive imagination playing tricks on me. But what I saw chilled me to the bone. Standing in the shadows just beyond the reach of the streetlight was a figure, tall and imposing, with empty eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that whoever or whatever it was, they were watching me for a moment. I was frozen in fear, unable to tear my gaze away from the figure outside my window. But then, with a surge of adrenaline, I snapped out of my trance and quickly drew the curtains closed, hoping to shut out whatever lurked in the darkness. But even as I retreated to the safety of my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. Who was that figure, and what did they want from me? I tried to convince myself that it was just a trick of the light or a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. As I lay in bed, trying in vain to push the encounter from my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains seemed to echo through the apartment, sending a chill down my spine. I tried to tell myself that I was just being paranoid, that there was nothing to be afraid of, but deep down, I knew that something was wrong, and as the night wore on, that feeling only grew stronger. I tossed and turned in bed, unable to find any semblance of peace or rest. Every noise outside my window sent my heart racing, and every shadow seemed to hold the promise of something sinister lurking just out of sight. Eventually, sure exhaustion overtook me, and I drifted off into a fitful sleep. But even in my dreams, I couldn't escape the feeling of dread that had settled over me like a shroud. When I woke up the next morning, the events of the previous night seemed like a distant memory, a half-forgotten nightmare. But as I went about my day, the feeling of unease lingered, a constant reminder of the terror that had geared me in the darkness. I tried to push the encounter to the back of my mind, to convince myself that it was just a one-time occurrence, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Whoever or whatever had been watching me from the shadows that night was still out there waiting and watching. From that day on, I lived in constant fear, always looking over my shoulder and jumping at the slightest sound. I never saw the figure outside my window again, but I knew that it was only a matter of time before I returned. But no matter how terrified I was, I refused to let fear dictate my life. I took precautions to ensure my safety, installing security cameras and double locking my doors at night, and slowly but surely, I began to reclaim a sense of normalcy, determined not to let the events of that night control me in the end. I may never know or what was watching me from the shadows that night, but one thing's for certain: I'll never forget the terror that gripped me in its icy embrace, and the knowledge that sometimes the things that scare us the most are the things we can't see coming. It was another late night at the office, and I found myself once again working alone in my apartment, surrounded by the glow of my computer screen. The deadlines were looming, and I was determined to finish the project before calling it a night. As I typed away at my keyboard, lost in my work, I suddenly heard a sound that made my blood run cold. Footsteps coming from the hallway outside my door. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but as the footsteps grew louder, I knew that I couldn't ignore them any longer. With trembling hands, I got up from my desk and made my way to the door. My heart pounding in my chest, I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob before finally mustering the courage to open it. But when I stepped into the hallway, there was no one there. I peered into the darkness, my eyes straining to see anything out of the ordinary. But there was nothing, just the empty hallway bathed in the soft glow of the overhead lights. I closed the door behind me, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over me. Maybe it was just a neighbor coming home late, or the sound of the wind rattling the windows. I tried to convince myself that there was a rational explanation for the footsteps, but deep down I knew that something wasn't right. I returned to my desk, trying to focus on my work, but the footsteps continued growing louder and more insistent with each passing minute. It was as if they were following me, stalking me through the darkness of the night. I tried to drown out the noise with music, turning up the volume on my headphones until it was almost deafening. But no matter how loud I played it, the footsteps persisted, echoing through the empty apartment like a sinister drum beat. I couldn't take it anymore, with a sense of dread gnawing in my stomach. I made my way back to the door, determined to confront whatever was lurking in the hallway outside. But when I opened the door again, there was still no one there. I called out into the darkness, my voice echoing off the walls, but there was no response. It was as if I was completely alone in the building, with no one to hear my cries for help. I slammed the door shut, feeling a wave of panic wash over me. Was I losing my mind? Was this some kind of elaborate prank? Or was there really someone out there watching me from the shadows? I tried to rationalize the situation, telling myself that it was just my imagination getting the better of me. But deep down, I knew that there was something more sinister at play. The footsteps continued throughout the night, growing louder and more menacing with each passing hour. I tried to block them out, burying myself and my work and trying to pretend like everything was normal. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone or something was lurking just beyond the walls of my apartment, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them that I was hearing? Footsteps in the hallway that I thought someone was out to get me. They would never believe me. I was on my own, trapped in a nightmare of my own making. And as the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, I knew that I had to do something before it was too late. With a sense of determination, I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and made my way back to the door. I didn't know what I would find on the other side, but I knew that I couldn't stay cooped up in my apartment any longer. As I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, the footsteps stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence that sent shivers down my spine. I shone the flashlight down the corridor, illuminating the empty space with its harsh beam, and that's when I saw a shadowy figure. Lurking just beyond the reach of the light, it was tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. I froze in terror, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared back at the figure, and then, without warning, it vanished into thin air, leaving me alone in the darkness. Once again, I stumbled back into my apartment, slamming the door shut behind me and locking it tight. I didn't sleep a wink at night, my mind racing with thoughts of what I had seen and heard. But when morning finally came, the footsteps were gone, replaced by the sounds of the city coming to life outside. My window, I tried to convince myself that it had all been a dream, a trick of the mind brought on by exhaustion and stress. But deep down, I knew the truth. The footsteps were real, and so was the figure that had stalked me through the night. I was out on a solitary fishing expedition in the open sea, just me and the endless expanse of water stretching out in every direction. The fog was thick that day, rolling in from the horizon and shrouding everything in a dense mist. As I navigated through the fog, I spotted something looming in the distance. It was a ship drifting aimlessly on the waves at first. I thought maybe it was just another fishing vessel lost in a fog like me. But as I got closer, I realized something was off. There was no movement on deck, no sign of life anywhere aboard the ship. It was like a ghost ship, abandoned in the middle of the ocean. I felt a chill run down my spine as I approached cautiously, unsure of what I would find. I called out, but there was no response, just the sound of the waves slapping against the hull. I tied up my boat and climbed aboard, my heart pounding in my chest. The air was thick with the smell of salt and decay, like something had died. Out there on the water, I searched the ship from top to bottom, but there was no sign of the crew. It was like they had vanished into thin air. I felt a growing sense of unease as I realized that I was alone on this abandoned vessel, surrounded by nothing but fog and ocean for miles in every direction. I tried to rationalize what I was seeing, telling myself that maybe the crew had abandoned ship in a hurry, or that they had fallen overboard and drifted away in the current. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The way the ship was drifting aimlessly, with no one at the helm. It was like it was waiting for something. I made my way back to my boat, feeling more anxious than ever. I knew I needed to get out of there, to put as much distance between me and that ghost ship as possible. As I untied the ropes and prepared to leave, I heard a sound coming from below deck. It was faint at first, barely audible over the roar of the waves. But then it grew louder and more distinct. It was laughter, maniacal, unhinged laughter, echoing through the empty halls of the ship. I froze, my blood running cold, as I realized I wasn't alone after all. There was someone else on board, someone who didn't want me to leave. I scrambled back onto the ship, my heart pounding in my chest, as I searched for the source of the laughter. But no matter where I looked, I couldn't find anyone. I felt like I was losing my mind, like the walls of the ship were closing in around me. I knew I needed to get out of there, to escape before whatever was haunting that ship found me. I raced back to my boat, not stopping until I was safely away from the cursed vessel. As I looked back one last time, I saw the fog closing in around it, swallowing it whole. I don't know what I encountered out there on the open sea, and I don't think I ever want to know. I'm a park ranger, responsible for patrolling a vast wilderness reserve nestled deep in the forest. It's a job that requires vigilance and a keen eye for any signs of trouble. One day, as I was making my rounds, I stumbled upon an abandoned campsite hidden among the trees at first. I thought nothing of it. Campers often come and go without a trace. But as I approached, a sense of unease settled over me. The campsite was in disarray, with tents torn and belongings strewn about as if there had been a struggle. My heart rate quickened as I realized that something wasn't right. I scanned the area for any signs of life, but there was no one in sight. The forest was eerily quiet, as if holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. With a growing sense of dread, I began to search the campsite for clues. It didn't take long for me to find evidence of a recent struggle. Bloodstains on the ground, broken branches and torn clothing littered the area. Panic surged through me as I realized that someone or something had attacked the campers. I knew I had to find out what had happened and ensure the safety of anyone still in the area. With my flashlight in hand, I ventured deeper into the forest, following a trail of broken branches and disturbed underbrush. Every sound seemed amplified in the darkness, sending a chill down my spine. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. ISP around my heart pounding in my chest as I searched for the source of the noise. But there was no one there, just the empty expanse of the forest stretching out before me. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread that settled over me, but it clung to me like a shadow. With trembling hands, I continued to search the area, my senses on high alert as I scanned the darkness for any sign of danger. But the forest seemed to hold its secrets close, refusing to reveal the truth of what had happened. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I caught sight of a figure lurking in the shadows, a man dressed in tattered clothing, his eyes wild with madness. Panic surged through me as I realized that he was the one responsible for the attack on the campsite. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I lunged forward and tackled him to the ground, pinning him down with all the strength I had left. But he fought back with a ferocity that caught me off guard, his nails deep, speaking into my skin as he struggled to break free with every ounce of strength I had left. I managed to subdue him and bind his hands with a length of rope, and then, with the help of backup that arrived just in time, I escorted him out of the forest and into custody. As I emerged from the darkness of the forest and into the light of day, relief flooded through me. I had survived the encounter with the deranged attacker. I recently graduated from college and moved into a new apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It was a cozy place, perfect for starting my new life as a young professional. The neighbors seemed friendly enough, and I felt safe and comfortable in my new surroundings. One night, I was home alone, enjoying some peace and quiet after a long day at work. I was just settling down on the couch with a book when I heard a knock on the door. It was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated for a moment before getting out to answer it. Standing on the other side of the door was my neighbor, a middle-aged man who lived in the apartment next to mine. He looked disheveled and out of breath, like he had been running. He claimed that he needed help, that there was an emergency in his apartment, and he didn't know what to do. He seemed genuinely distressed, and I felt sorry for him. Without thinking, I invited him inside, eager to lend a helping hand. But as soon as he stepped through the doorway, I knew that something was wrong. There was something off about his demeanor, something unsettling in the way he looked at me. It was like he was sizing me up, like he was trying to figure out if I was a threat. I tried to brush off the feeling of unease and let him into the living room, asking him what was wrong. But instead of answering, he just stood there, staring at me with a strange intensity. I felt a cayenne form in the pit of my stomach as I realized that I had made a mistake. This man wasn't here for help. He was here for something else entirely. But before I could react, he lunged at me, his hands reaching out to grab me. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest, as I tried to put some distance between us. But he was relentless, pursuing me through the apartment with a look of madness in his eyes. I knew that I needed to get out of there to escape, before it was too late, with adrenaline coursing through my veins. I made a break for the door, praying that I could make it to safety. But just as I reached for the doorknob, he grabbed me from behind his like iron around my arms. I struggled and fought, desperate to break free, but he was too strong. In a last-stitched effort to escape, I came kicked out blindly, connecting with something solid. There was a crud of pain, and is loosened just enough for me to slip away. I raced out of the apartment, my heart pounding in my ears as I ran down the hallway and out into the night. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of the street, where I collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for breath. I knew that I needed to call the police to report what had happened and make sure that this man was brought to justice, but for now, all I could do was catch my breath and try to process the horror of what had just occurred. As I sat there on the sidewalk, shaking with fear and adrenaline, I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if I hadn't managed to escape. What was this man's motive, and why had he targeted me? But those questions would have to wait for another time. For now, all had mattered was that I was safe, but I had managed to get away from him before it was too late. I was driving home from visiting family, my daughter sound asleep in the back seat. When it happened, my car sputtered and jerked before finally coming to a complete stop on the deserted road. Panic surged through me as I realized that I was stranded in the middle of the woods with no self-surface and no one around for miles. I tried to remain calm as I popped the hood and attempted to diagnose the problem, but my efforts were futile. It was clear that I wasn't going to be able to fix the car myself, and with the sun sinking lower in the sky, I knew I needed to find help and fast, leaving my daughter safely buckled in her car seat. I set out on foot, hoping to find a house or a business where I could use a phone to call for assistance. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Strange noises echoed through the trees, the rustling of leaves and the snap of twigs underfoot. Every shadow seemed to conceal some unseen threat, and I found myself glancing nervously over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something lurking in the darkness. The woods felt alive with malevolent energy, and with each passing minute, my fear grew stronger. I quickened my pace, desperate to find help, before whatever was out there found me finally, after what felt like an eternity. I stumbled upon a small cabin nestled among the trees. Relief flooded through me as I approached the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I knocked hesitantly, half expecting the door to swing open to reveal some horror lurking within, but to my surprise, a kindly-looking man answered, his expression one of concern as he took in my beetle appearance. I quickly explained my situation, and the man, whose name was John, offered to help. He invited me inside, where I was greeted by the warm glow of a fire crackling in the heat as John went to fetch his phone. I sank into a chair, my nerves still on edge despite the comfort of the cabin. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. Like a shroud, minutes turned into hours as we waited for help to arrive, and with each passing moment my fear grew stronger. What if whatever was out there found us before help came? My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. But before I could succumb to panic, the sound of an approaching engine broke through the silence. Relief flooded through me as I realized that help had finally arrived. I thanked John profusely for his kindness and rushed outside to meet the tow truck that had come to rescue us. As the driver worked to hook up my car, I couldn't help but glance nervously into the surrounding woods, half expecting to see some sinister figure lurking in the shadows. but there was nothing there, just a rustle of leaves and the distant hood of an owl. And as we drove away from the cabin, leaving the woods behind us, I couldn't help but feel grateful to be alive. The whole experience had been terrifying, but it had also reminded me of the kindness of strangers and the importance of staying calm in the face of danger as we pulled onto the highway. I glanced one last time into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something or someone following us, but the road stretched out behind us, empty and devoid of any threat. With a sigh of relief, I turned my gaze forward, focusing on the road ahead, and as the lights of the city loomed in the distance, I knew that I was finally safe, at least for now. It was one of those stormy nights where the rain pounded relentlessly against the windshield, making it hard to see anything beyond a few feet ahead. I was on a rural delivery route, trying to navigate my way through winding back roads that seemed to stretch on forever. As the storm intensified, I realized that I had taken a wrong turn somewhere along the way. Panic began to rise within me as I struggled to find my bearings in the darkness with each passing minute. The road seemed to grow more desolate, with no signs of civilization in sight. Feeling a sense of urgency, I decided to pull over and ask for directions from the next person I saw. Just as I was about to give up hope, I spotted a figure up ahead, huddled under the shelter of a dilapidated bus stop. Relief flooded through me as I approached the stranger, eager for any assistance they could offer. But as I got closer, a feeling of unease began to gnaw at the pit of my stomach. There was something off about the person standing before me, something that sent shivers down my spine. Nevertheless, I pushed aside my instincts and greeted them with a friendly smile, explaining my predicament and asking for directions back to the main road. To my surprise, the person responded with a smile of their own, offering to help me find my way. Grateful for their kindness, I followed their directions without question, eager to escape the isolation of the back roads and return to the city safety of civilization. But as we drove deeper into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The roads grew narrower and more treacherous, with towering trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. I began to suspect that the person beside me wasn't leading me back to safety at all, but further into the heart of darkness. Suddenly, my worst fears were realized as the person directed me down a secluded dirt path far removed from any sembling of civilization. Alarm bells rang in my mind as I realized that I had fallen into a trap, lured away from safety by someone with sinister intentions. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I slammed on the brakes and demanded answers from the person beside me. But instead of responding, they simply smiled, their eyes glinting with malice as they reached for something hidden beneath their jacket. Terrified for my life, I knew that I had to act fast if I wanted to escape. With a surge of determination, I flung open the car door and bolted into the darkness. The sound of my pounding footsteps drowned out by the roar of the storm branches whipped in my face as I ran, my heart pounding in my chest. As I struggled to put as much distance between myself and my would-be scent as possible, I didn't stop running until I was sure that I was safe, far away from the danger that lurked in the shadows. Exhausted and trembling, I collapsed onto the ground, the rain soaking through my clothes as I tried to catch my breath. But even as I lay there, gasping for air, I knew that I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. As the storm raged on overhead, I vowed to never again trust a stranger in the darkness, to always listen to my instincts, and never let fear cloud my judgment. And as I finally made my way back to the main road, I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been so lucky. It was just another night on patrol, the streets quiet and deserted. As I cruised along in my squad car, the radio crackled to life dispatch, alerting me to a suspicious vehicle parked on the side of the road. I made my way to the location, my senses on high alert. As I approached the vehicle, it was an old sedan, its windows tinted darkly, blending into the shadows of the night. I cautiously approached the car, my hand resting on the grip of my gun. As I peered through the window, what I saw inside sent it chilled down my spine. A woman, her eyes wide with fear, cowering in the trunk. I wasted no time in forcing the trunk open, the hinges squealing in protest as I reached inside to help her out. She was trembling, her hand shaking as she clung to me, her breath coming in ragged gasps. I radioed for backup, my voice tight with urgency. As I relayed the situation to dispatch, they responded quickly. Sirens wailing in the distance as backup units raced to our location. As we waited for backup to arrive, I tried to calm the woman down, reassuring her that she was safe now. But her eyes were haunted, her gaze darting nervously around the darkened street as if expecting her captor to appear at any moment. When backup finally arrived, I briefed him on the situation, my heart pounding in my chest as we formulated a plan to apprehend the kidnappers. We spread out, combing the area for any sign of the perpetrators, our flashlights cutting through the darkness like beacons of hope. But as we searched, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that our every move was being monitored by unseen eyes. I cried, my gun tighter, my senses on high alert as we pressed on, determined to bring the kidnappers to justice. And then, just when we least expected it, they struck, emerging from the shadows like ghosts, their faces twisted with malice as they lunged at us with weapons drawn. It was chaos, a whirlwind of gunfire and shouting as we fought for our lives, our training kicking in as we exchanged fire with the kidnappers. But even as we held our ground, I knew that we were outnumbered, and running out time. I made a split-second decision, shouting for my fellow officers to fall back as I covered their retreat. I laid down, suppressing fire, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to buy them precious seconds to escape. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, backup arrived, a flood of flashing lights and sirens as reinforcements poured in from all directions. Together we overwhelmed the kidnappers, taking them into custody. One by one, as the adrenaline of the battle slowly began to fade. As I stood there, surrounded by my fellow officers, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in our teamwork, our bravery, and our unwavering determination to protect the innocent. And as for the woman we rescued, she was safe now, her nightmare finally over, thanks to our quick thinking and decisive action. She thanked us profusely, her eyes shining with gratitude as she embraced each and every one of us in turn. As I drove home that night, the events of the evening replaying in my mind like a scene from a movie, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Satisfaction in knowing that I had made a difference, that I had helped to bring a dangerous criminal to justice and saved to life in the process. The ride up to the mountains was long and windy, the road sneaking through the rugged landscape like a ribbon of asphalt. I had been looking forward to this trip for weeks, eager to reconnect with my daughter after years of estrangement. But as I pulled up to her cabin, nestled deep in the heart of the Colorado wilderness, a sense of unease settled over me like a heavy fog parking the car. I stepped out onto the gravel driveway and surveyed my surroundings. The cabin looked deserted, its windows dark and empty. I called out for my daughter, but there was no response, only the distant sound of the wind whispering through the trees, my heart pounding in my chest. I approached the front door and tried the handle, but it was locked tight with a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. I pulled out my spare key and let myself in the door, creaking ominously on its hinges. As I pushed it open, inside the cabin was eerily silent, the air thick with the scent of pine and something else, something metallic and accurate. I called out for my daughter again, but there was still no answer. Only the sound of my own voice echoing off the walls. I searched every room, every nook and cranny, but there was no sign of her. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but an empty shell of a home, panic rising in my chest. I rushed outside and scanned the surrounding forest, hoping against hope that she had simply gone for a walk and gotten lost. But there was no sign of her, no trace of her presence anywhere. Fighting back a sense of despair, I resolved to search the area myself, to leave no stone unturned, until I found her. I grabbed a flashlight in a jacket and set off into the wilderness, the darkness closing in around me like a suffocating blanket for hours. I trudged through the woods, my heart pounding in my ears. With every step, the only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath my feet and the distant howl of a wolf echoing through the night. And then, just when I was beginning to lose hope, I saw it, a faint glimmer of light in the distance. I quickened my pace, my breath coming in red gasps, as I stumbled toward the source. As I drew closer, I could make out the outline of a small clearing illuminated by the soft glow of a campfire. And there, sitting by the fire, was my daughter. Relief flooded through me as I rushed forward and enveloped her in a tight embrace. She looked up at me with tear-stained eyes, and I knew that whatever had happened, we would get through it together. But as we sat by the fire, warming ourselves against the chill of the night, my daughter began to tell me her story, and I felt a chill run down my spine. She had been out for a walk earlier that evening when she stumbled upon a group of strange men lurking in the woods. They had chased her through the trees, their eyes filled with malice, until she had finally managed to lose them and find her way back to the cabin. As she spoke, I felt a cold knot of fear form in the pit of my stomach. Who were these men, and what did they want with my daughter? I knew that we had to get out of there, to leave this place far behind us, before it was too late gathering our belongings. We made our way back to the cabin and packed up the car, our movements frantic and desperate as we drove away from that isolated cabin in the mountains. I couldn't shake the feeling that we're being watched, that those men were still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their next victim. But we made it out safe, my daughter and I. And as we drove down the winding mountain roads, I vowed never to return to that cursed place again, for in those remote mountains of Colorado there are secrets best left undisturbed, and dangers lurking in the darkness that are better off forgotten. I was a journalist on the trail of a big story, a series of mysterious disappearances in a small town that had the whole community on edge. I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. So, when I received a tip about a possible lead in the surrounding forest, I didn't hesitate to investigate. Armed with my notebook and camera, I set out into the woods, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. But as I ventured deeper into the forest, the trees closed, and around me, their branches blocking out the sunlight and casting long shadows on the forest floor. I tried to stay focused, but the eerie silence of the woods unnerved me. I pressed on, following a faint trail that seemed to lead deeper into the heart of the forest. With each step, the feeling of haze grew stronger, like I was being watched by unseen eyes. And then, just when I thought I couldn't go on, I stumbled upon a clearing in the trees, a clearing that seemed to pulse with otherworldly energy. In the center of the clearing stood a group of people dressed in tattered robes and chanting in a language I didn't understand. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched in horror, realizing that I had stumbled upon a sinister cult hiding in the woods. They seemed to sense my presence, turning towards me with eyes that gleamed with madness. I knew I had to get out of there to escape before they noticed me, and I became their next victim with a surge of adrenaline. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush with reckless abandon. But the cultists were out on my heels. their shouts echoing through the forest as they pursued me. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning with exertion as I struggled to put distance between us. I didn't dare look back. As I ran, the fear and panic driving me forward, it felt like hours before I finally emerged from the trees, gasping for breath and covered in sweat. But even as I collapsed on the forest floor, her leaf flooding through me, I knew that I couldn't rest for long. The cultists were still out there lurking in the shadows, waiting for their chance to strike. With a shaky breath, I forced myself to stand and keep moving, determined to attack them and escape with my life. It was a race against time, a battle of wits between me and the sinister force that lurked in the depths of the forest. I pushed aside my fear and pressed on my senses on high alert. As I navigated the treacherous terrain, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a shiver down my spine as I searched for a way out. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw it a break in the trees up ahead, a glimmer of light that promised safety and salvation. With renewed determination, I pushed myself towards it, ignoring the pain and exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm me. And then finally, I burst through the trees and into the open air, gasping for breath. As I emerged into the daylight, I collapsed under the ground, exhausted and shaken, but alive. I was on a road trip, cruising down backcountry roads with no particular destination in mind. I was running low on fuel, so I pulled into this remote gas station in the middle of nowhere. As I stepped inside, I immediately felt eyes on me. There were a group of locals hanging out by the counter, talking in hushed whispers. They stopped as soon as I walked in, turning to stare at me with intense curiosity. I tried to ignore them, focusing on filling up my tank and getting back on the road. But they seemed overly eager to strike up a conversation, asking me where I was headed and if I needed any help. I felt a growing sense of unease as they crowded around me, their smiles too wide and their eyes too bright. It was like they were trying too hard to be friendly, like they had something to hide. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But as I paid for my gas and made my way back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As I pulled out of the gas station, I noticed a car following me. It was one of the locals from the gas station, tailing me closely. As I drove down the deserted back roads, I tried to lose them, taking a series of sharp turns and detours, but they stayed right on my tail. I started to panic, wondering what they wanted from me and why they were following me. I considered pulling over and confronting them, but something told me it wouldn't end well. So I kept driving, hoping to find help or a way to escape. But no matter how fast I drove or how many turns I took, they stayed right behind me, like they were toying with me, leading me deeper into the wilderness. I felt like a trapped animal with nowhere to run and no one to turn to for help. I knew I had to do something, anything, to get away from them. Finally, I spotted a turnoff up ahead, a narrow dirt road leading off into the trees. Without thinking, I slammed on the brakes and swerved onto the dirt road, praying it would lead me to safety. As I drove deeper into the forest, the car following me fell further and further behind. I breathed a sigh of relief, grateful to have escaped whatever danger they posed. I drove for hours, not stopping until I was safely back on the main road, far away from that remote gas station and the locals who had tried to trap me. I was out camping in this secluded forest clearing, surrounded by nothing but trees for miles in every direction. It was the perfect spot for a little peace and quiet, or so I thought as I set up my tent. I noticed something strange about the trees surrounding the clearing. There were these symbols etched into the bark, like someone had carved them there with a knife. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just some kids messing around, or maybe it was some kind of natural phenomenon. But the more I looked at them, the more uneasy I felt as night fell. I built a fire and settled in for the evening, trying to shake off the feeling of unease, but then I heard it whispers echoing through the woods like the wind through the trees. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I strained to listen, trying to make out what the whispers were saying, but they were too faint, too distant. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that I was letting my fear get the best of me, but deep down, I knew there was something out there in the darkness, something sinister lurking just beyond the trees. I huddled closer to the fire, trying to drown out the whispers with the crackling of the flames, but no matter how hard I tried, they persisted, growing louder and more insistent with each passing moment. I felt like I was being watched, like there were eyes on me from every direction. I wanted to run, to get as far away from that clearing as possible, but something held me back, some primal instinct that told me I wouldn't make it out alive if I tried. I sat there for what felt like hours, paralyzed with fear, until finally, the whisper stopped. The forest fell silent once again, like nothing had ever happened. I waited until morning to pack up my camp and get out of there, not wanting to spend another minute in that cursed clearing as I hiked back to civilization. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me, something ancient and malevolent. I tried to put the experience behind me, to tell myself it was just a trick of the mind, but deep down, I knew the truth. There was something out there in the woods, something that didn't want me there. I vowed never to return to that forest, to stay as far away from those whispers as possible. But even now, as I sit here writing this, I can still hear them echoing in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of the terror I felt that night in the secluded clearing. The road stretched out before me, winding its way through the rugged mountains like a ribbon of asphalt. I had chosen this scenic route to break up the monotony of my journey. But now, as I navigated the twisting turns and steep inclines, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping over me. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape and plunging the mountains into darkness. I pressed on my headlights, cutting through the gloom as I searched for any sign of civilization. But as the minutes turned into hours, I realized that I was hopelessly lost. The winding roads seemed to stretch on endlessly, leading me deeper and deeper into the heart of the mountains with no end in sight. Just when I was beginning to lose hope, I spotted a flicker of light in the distance. My AR leaped with excitement as I steered the car toward the source of illumination, praying that it would lead me to safety. As I drew closer, the outline of a cabin came into view, nestled among the trees like a beacon of hope. In the darkness, relief flooded through me as I pulled up outside the cabin, eager to seek shelter from the cold mountain night. But as I approached the door, a sense of foreboding washed over me. There was something not quite right about this place, something that sent shivers down my spine and made my skin crawl. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob, before finally summoning the courage to push it open and step inside. The interior of the cabin was dimly lit, casting long shadows that danced across the walls like specters in the night. As I ventured further into the cabin, I became aware of a strange smell hanging in the air, a sickly sweet odor that made my stomach churn with nausea. I pressed a hand to my mouth, trying to block out the scent, as I searched for any sign of life. And then I saw him, a figure lurking in the shadows, his features obscured by darkness, as he watched me with eyes that glinted like shards of ice. Fear me like a feast as I realized I was now alone in the cabin, that there was someone or something else lurking in the darkness with me. I turned to flee, but before I could reach the door, the figure stepped forward, blocking my path with a menacing grin. My heart hammered in my chest as I backed away, searching desperately for a way out of the cabin and away from the sinister stranger who threatened my safety. But no matter which way I turned, he was there, his presence looming over me like a dark shadow that refused to be. Shaken panic bubbled up inside me as I realized that I was trapped with nowhere to run and no one to help me. I could feel the stranger's eyes pouring into me, his gaze filled with a malevolent intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I knew then that I was in grave danger, that if I didn't find a way to escape soon, it would be too late. With trembling hands, I reached for the nearest object, a heavy lamp that sat on a nearby table, and swung at the stranger with all the force I could muster. The blow connected with a sickening thud, and the figure staggered backward, stunned by the sudden attack, ceasing my chance. I bolted for the door, throwing it open and sprinting out into the night. I could hear the stranger's footsteps echoing behind me as I fled into the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest with every step. But I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of my car, where I collapsed into the driver's seat and locked the doors behind me. I sat there for what felt like hours, my breath coming in red gasps, as I tried to process what had just happened. Eventually, I mustered the courage to start the car and drive away from the cabin, leaving behind the darkness and the terror that worked within. And as I left the mountains behind me and continued on my journey, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped a fate far worse than death. I was a journalist sent to investigate reports of a missing person in a remote town. The town was tucked away in the mountains, far from the hustle and bustle of civilization. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, or so I thought as I arrived in town. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The streets were deserted, and the few people I did see seemed wary of outsiders. I tried to ask around about the missing person, but no one seemed willing to talk. They just gave me these blank stares, like they didn't want to get involved. I knew I had to take deeper to uncover the truth behind disappearance. So I started poking around, asking questions, and snooping around. Where I wasn't supposed to, that's when I stumbled upon it. A hidden community tucked away in the mountains, living off the crit and off the radar of the outside world at first. I thought maybe they were just a group of survivalists or doomsday preppers trying to escape the chaos of the modern world. But the more I learned about them, the more I realized that there was something darker at play. They had their own rules, their own way of doing things, and anyone who tried to leave or speak out against them was dealt with swiftly and mercilessly. I knew I was treading on dangerous ground, but I couldn't turn back now. I had to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. As I delved deeper into the community, I uncovered evidence of unspeakable horrors. Abuse, corruption, and even murder were all part of their everyday lives. I tried to document everything, to gather enough evidence to bring them to justice. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized that I was in way over my head. I started to feel like I was being watched, like there were eyes on me from every direction I knew I had to get out of. There before it was too late, but as I tried to leave town, I realized that they weren't going to let me go that easily. They knew what I was up to, and they weren't about to let me expose their dark secrets to the world. I tried to run, to escape into the mountains and disappear before they could catch me, but they were one step ahead of me, closing in from all sides. I felt like a trapped animal with nowhere to run and no one to turn to for help. I knew I had to think fast if I wanted to survive. I managed to slip away into the woods, hiking out in a remote cabin until I could come up with a plan. But even there I wasn't safe. They found me, cornering me in the woods and dragging me back to town. I fought back with everything I had, but it was no use. They were too strong, too determined to see their dark secrets remain hidden. I thought I was done for that. I would never make it out of that town alive. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, help arrived. The authorities had been tipped off about what was going on in the town, and they swooped in to rescue me. Before it was too late, As I was led away from that nightmare town, I couldn't help but feel grateful to be alive. But even now, as I sit here writing this, I can't shake the feeling that they're still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their next unsuspecting victim. I was out in this remote valley, just trying to get some dope shots of nature for my photography gig. It was already getting dark, but it's all about the golden hour vibe, you feel me, so I'm setting up my gear, getting ready to capture some epic sunset shots. When I see these weird lights in the sky at first, I'm thinking it's just some planes or something. But these lights, man, they were moving in, was planes ain't supposed to move, zigzagging, hovering, all kinds of crazy stuff. I'm like, what the heck is going on? So being the curious idiot that I decide to follow them. I trek through the woods, following those lights deeper and deeper into the valley the whole time. I'm feeling this weird mix of excitement and dread, like I know I shouldn't be messing with whatever this is, but I can't stop myself finally, after what feels like forever. I come to this clearing, and that's when I see it, a freaking secret government facility hidden in the mountains. I'm talking fences is topped with razor wire guards, patrolling with guns, the whole 9 yards now. I'm freaking out, right, like HCH, just a nature photographer trying to get some cool shots. And here I am stumbling onto some top secret government stuff. But at the same time, I got to know what's going on, so I start sneaking closer, trying to stay hidden in the shadows, and that's when I see them bringing in these crates, big metal ones, like something out of a sci-fi movie, and the guards. Man, they're armed to the teeth, looking all serious and stuff. I'm thinking maybe I should just turn around and hightail it out of there, but then I hear this voice behind me, freeze, don't move. I spin around and there's this guard aiming his gun right at me. My heart's pounding so hard I can barely breathe. He starts yelling at me, asking me what I'm doing there, who I am, all that stuff. I'm stuttering and stammering, trying to come up with some excuse. But before I know it, they've got me handcuffed and thrown in the back of a fan. Next thing I know, I'm being interrogated by these government guys, asking me a bunch of questions about what I saw, who I told, all that jazz. I'm trying to play it cool, but inside I'm freaking out. They keep me locked up for what feels like forever, Krill telling me about every little detail, and then just when I'm about to lose my mind, they let me go. No explanation, no apology, nothing. I stumble out of that facility, feeling like I just stepped into the twilight zone, and the whole way home I'm thinking about those lights, those crates, and wondering what the heck I stumbled onto out there in the woods. But one thing's for sure, I ain't going back there anytime soon. I was driving home from my night's shift at the hospital, exhausted and eager to crawl into bed and finally get some rest. The road stretched out before me, deserted and silent in the dead of night. As I rounded a bend, I saw her, a lone figure standing by the side of the road, her silhouette illuminated by the glow of the streetlights. At first I thought she might need help, so I slowed down and rolled down my window to offer assistance. But as I drew closer, I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something off, something unsettling that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Still, I couldn't just leave her there alone in the dark. So I pulled over and stepped out of my car, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. She turned to face me, and I could see the desperation in her eyes, the fear edged into our features. Before I could say a word, she spoke, her voice trembling with emotion. She told me she had been kidnapped, that she had managed to escape or tapped her but didn't know where to go or what to do next. My blood ran cold at her words, and I felt a surge of panic rising within me. I knew I had to help her, to get her to safety as quickly as possible. But as I reached out to take her hand, she recoiled, her eyes whitening with fear, and that's when I realized she wasn't Alone, out here, in the darkness, I spun around just in time to see him, a man emerging from the shadows, his face twisted into a sinister grin. He moved toward us with purpose, his steps slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey, with a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. I realized that I had walked right into a trap, that this woman was no victim but a willing accomplice to her capture, and now I was caught in their twisted game of cat and mouse. I turned to run, but it was too late. They were upon me, their hands crapping at me from all sides, pulling me down into the darkness. I fought back with all the strength I had, kicking and screaming as I struggled to break free from their grasp. But they were too strong, too determined to let me escape. They dragged me into their car, throwing me into the back seat like a sack of potatoes. I could hear them laughing as they sped off into the night, leaving me trapped and helpless in their clutches for hours. We drove through the darkness, the road stretching out before us like an endless abyss. I didn't know where they were taking me or what they planned to do with me, but I knew one thing for certain: I had to find a way to escape before it was too late. With every passing mile, the fear gnawed me like a ravenous beast, tearing away at my sanity until there was nothing left but raw, primal terror. I pray for a miracle, for some stroke of luck that would set me free from this nightmare once and for all. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw it, the faint glow of streetlights up ahead, like a beacon of hope in the darkness. With a surge of adrenaline, I threw open the car door and leaped out onto the road, my heart pounding in my chest like a jackhammer. I ran as fast as my legs were tearing me, the sound of their laughter echoing in my ears like a taunt. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I ran until I thought my lungs would burst, until I collapsed onto the pavement in exhaustion and despair. But even then, I didn't give up. I crawled, I stumbled, I dragged myself forward, inch by agonizing inch, until finally, mercifully, I saw the lights of a passing car up ahead with a desperate cry for help. I waved my arms, frantic ally, until they screeched to a halt beside me. I told them everything about the woman, about the man, about the nightmare I had endured. They listened in horrified silence, their eyes wide with disbelief, and then without a word they drove me to the nearest police station, where I recounted my story to the authorities in painstaking detail. They promised to do everything in their power to find those responsible and bring them to justice, and though I knew it would be a long and difficult road ahead, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in what felt like an eternity, as I sit here now, safe and sound in the comfort of my own home. I can't help but wonder, what if I hadn't stopped to help that woman on the side of the road? What if I had just kept driving, oblivious to the danger lurking in the darkness? But then again, perhaps it was fate that brought us together, that led me to that fateful encounter on that desolate stretch of highway. Perhaps in the end, it was all just part of a larger plan, a test of strength and resilience that would ultimately lead me back to safety and sanity once more. I had been driving for hours, the road stretching endlessly before me as I journeyed through the desolate landscape. It was getting late, and exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. I knew I needed to find a place to rest for the night, somewhere safe where I could recharge before continuing my journey. That's when I spotted it, a run-down motel nestled on the side of the road, its neon sign flickering weakly in the darkness. Pulling into the parking lot, I felt a shiver run down my spine as I surveyed the dimly lit building. It looked like something straight out of a horror movie, but desperate times call for desperate measures. I parked my car and gathered my belongings, steeling myself for whatever awaited me inside. As I stepped through the front door, a musty smell assaulted my senses, and I suppressed a gag as I made my way to the front desk. The clerk behind the counter eyed me with a mixture of boredom and suspicion, but I ignored his stare as I requested a room for the night. He handed me a key without a word, and I quickly made my way down the narrow hallway to my assigned room. The corridor was here quiet, the only sound echoing footsteps against the linoleum floor entering my room. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I closed the door behind me. But that relief was short-lived as I surveyed the dingy interior. The wallpaper was peeling, the carpet stained with unknown substances, and a chill hung in the air that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. I quickly locked the door and set about making myself as comfortable as possible, though the thought of sleeping seemed impossible in such a place. I tried to distract myself with my phone, scrolling through social media in an attempt to forget where I was, but as the minutes tick by, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me like a heavy blanket. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains sent my heart racing, and I found myself jumping at shadows in the dim light, and then I heard it, a faint scratching coming from somewhere outside the room. I froze my breath, catching in my throat as I strained to listen. The scratching grew louder, more insistent, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. I considered calling the front desk, but something held me back, a primal instinct warning me not to draw attention to myself. Instead, I crept over to the window and cautiously peered outside. My heart pounding in my chest. What I saw sent a jolt of fear straight through me. There, lurking in the shadows just beyond the pool of light cast by the motel's flickering sign, was a figure. It was tall and gaunt, its features obscured by the darkness, but I could feel its eyes pouring into me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. I stumbled back from the window, my mind racing with panic. Who was this person, and what did they want with me? I knew I had to get out of there, but the thought of leaving the safety of my room was almost too much to bear. But then I heard it again, the scratching, now accompanied by a low gut crawl that sent shivers down my spine. With a surge of adrenaline, I made up my mind. I had to leave, and I had to leave. Now, gathering my courage, I flung open the door and bolted down the hallway, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear footsteps behind me echoing off the walls, and I knew I was being pursued. I didn't dare look back, didn't dare slow down until I reached the front desk, where the clerk stood staring at me with wide eyes without a word. I thrust the key into his hand and dashed out the door, the cool night air hitting me like a punch to the chest. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, and even then, I didn't feel safe. I fumbled with the keys, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold them, until finally I managed to start the engine and peel out of the parking lot, leaving the motel and its sinister inhabitants far behind me. As I drove into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me like a shadow. Who were those people, and what did they want with me? I'm a backpacker, exploring the rouged coastline in search of a DV venture and solitude. It's just me, the sound of the crashing waves and the endless expanse of the sea stretching out before me. But as I hiked along the coastline, I stumbled upon a hidden sea cave nestled in the rocky cliffs. Intrigued, I decided to explore further, eager to see what secrets lay hidden within its depths. As I entered the cave, the air grew cooler and the sound of the waves faded into the distance. I moved deeper into the darkness, my flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. But then, just when I thought I had seen everything the cave had to offer, I heard the sound of footsteps echoing off. The walls' panic surged through me. As I realized I was now alone, I froze in place, my heart pounding in my chest, as I strained to listen for any sign of danger. But the footsteps grew closer, and I knew I had to act fast if I wanted to escape with trembling hands. I searched for a way out, but the walls of the cave seemed to close and around me, trapping me in their suffocating embrace. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I caught sight of a narrow passage way up ahead, a glimmer of light shining through the darkness. like a beacon of hope with renewed determination. I pushed myself towards it, ignoring the pain and exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm me. But as I emerged from the cave and into the open air, her leaf flooded through me. I collapsed onto the rocky shore, gasping for breath as I looked out at the vast expanse of the sea. I had escaped the clutches of the strange men, but the experience will last in my head forever. I'm a wildlife biologist, spending my days studying animal behavior in the secluded depths of the forest. It's a solitary job, but I thrive on the challenge of unraveling the mysteries of nature on one particular expedition. I found myself deep in the heart of the forest, observing a pack of wolves as they hunted their prey. But as I watched from my hidden vantage point, I noticed something strange. The wolves were exhibiting aggressive behavior unlike anything I had ever seen before. At first, I chalked it up to natural instincts, but as I continued to observe, I realized that there was something more going on. The wolves seemed to be working together with a sense of purpose, as if they were being controlled by some unseen force. Intrigued, I decided to investigate further, determined to uncover the truth behind their strange behavior. But as I ventured deeper into the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, and then just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I stumbled upon a clearing in the trees, a clearing that seemed to pulse with otherworldly energy. In the center of the clearing stood a group of people, their faces obscured by masks, as they chanted in a language I didn't understand. I watched in horror as the wolves gathered around them, their eyes gleaming with a malevolent light. It was like something out of a nightmare, a twisted ritual that seemed to bind the wolves to the will of their human masters. Panic surged through me as I realized that I was in grave danger. I knew I had to get out of there before the wolves and their mysterious handlers noticed me with trembling hands. I backed away from the clearing, my heart pounding in my chest, as I tried to make sense of what I had just witnessed. But before I could escape, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. I turned to see a group of masked figures emerging from the trees, their eyes fixed on me with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I knew I had to get out of there to escape before they caught up to me, and I became their next victim with adrenal and coursing through my veins. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush with reckless abandon. I could hear the wolves howling in the distance, their voices echoing through the forest like a chorus of doom. But even as I fled, I knew that I couldn't help run them forever. I needed to find a way to outsmart them, to use my knowledge of the forest to my advantage with every step. I searched for a way out, my senses on high alert. As I navigated the treacherous terrain, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through me, as I raced against time to escape the relentless pursuit of the wolves and their sinister handlers. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I caught sight of a narrow passage way up ahead, a glimmer of light shining through the darkness. Like a beacon of hope, with renewed determination, I pushed myself towards it, ignoring the pain and exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm me. And then finally, I burst through the surface and into the open air, gasping for breath. As I emerged from the depths of the forest, I collapsed under the ground, exhausted and shaken, but alive. I was hiking in this uncharted mountain range, just me in the wilderness. I was searching for a new trail, something off the beaten path. That's when I stumbled upon these strange symbols carved into the rocks. They were like nothing I'd ever seen before, all intricate and mysterious. I was curious, so I started following the trail of symbols, thinking maybe they'd lead me to something cool. But the further I went, the more uneasy I felt. It was like I was being watched, like something didn't want me there. And then, out of nowhere, I stumbled upon this clearing. There were these makeshift shelters, all camouflaged and hidden among the trees. At first I thought maybe it was just some kind of survivalist camp, but Then I saw the people. They were armed to the teeth, watching me with suspicious eyes. I tried to explain that I was just a hiker, that I meant no harm. But they weren't having it. They told me I wasn't allowed to leave, that I knew too much. I tried to protest, to hour my way out of it, but they wouldn't listen. They said they couldn't risk me going back and telling anyone about their camp. I felt this chill run down my spine, like I'd stumbled into something I shouldn't have. I knew I had to get out of there. But with those survivalists blocking my way, I didn't know how. I tried to reason with them, to appeal to their humanity, but they were cold and unyielding. They said they had rules, that outsiders weren't welcome in their territory. I was starting to panic, wondering if I'd ever make it out of there alive. But then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw my chance. One of the survivalists let his guard down for just a moment, and I seized the opportunity. I bolted into the trees, running as fast as I could, praying that I wouldn't get shot in the back. I could hear them shouting behind me, their voices growing fainter as I put more distance between us. I didn't stop running until I was miles away from the cursed camp. I stumbled out of the woods, shaking with fear and exhaustion. But I was alive, and that's all that mattered. I vowed never to go back to that mountain range again, to stay as far away from those survivalists as possible. But even now, as I sit here writing this, I can't shake the feeling that they're still out there watching and waiting for their next unsuspecting victim, and I pray that no one else ever has to experience what I went through that day. I was on assignment in this remote coastal town, tasked with capturing the rugged beauty of the shoreline. The air was salty and thick with the sound of crashing waves. As I ventured out with my camera, eager to capture some breathtaking shots, as I explored, I stumbled upon this old fishing village tucked away on the edge of a cliff. It looked like it had been abandoned in haste, with empty houses and overturned boats scattered about. I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. As I wandered through the deserted streets, there was something eerie about the place, like it was frozen in time. I started snapping photos, trying to capture the haunting beauty of the abandoned village. But the deeper I ventured, the more I felt like I was being watched. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. But then I heard it, a faint whisper tarried on the wind, like someone calling out to me from the shadows. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to run, to get as far away from that place as possible, but something compelled me to stay, to keep exploring despite the growing sense of dread in the pit of my stomach. And that's when I saw her, a young girl standing at the edge of the cliff, her hair whipping in the wind. She looked so out of place, like she didn't belong in this abandoned village. I called out to her, asking if she was okay, but she didn't respond. She just stood there, staring out at the sea with empty eyes. I approached her, cautiously trying to get a better look. But as I got closer, I realized something was terribly wrong. Her skin was pale and translucent, like she was some kind of ghost. I stumbled back in horror, realizing that I was standing face to face with something that shouldn't exist. But before I could react, she vanished into thin air, leaving me alone in the darkness. I ran as fast as I could, not stopping until I was back in the safety of my hotel room. I locked the door behind me, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, lurking in the shadows. And as I lay awake in bed, listening to the sound of the waves crashing against the shore, I knew that I would never be able to forget the horrors of that abandoned fishing village. I'm a mountaineer, always seeking the next challenge in my quest to conquer the tallest peaks. One day, I found myself scaling a treacherous peak, the wind whipping around me as I fought my way up the steep incline. But just when I thought I had reached the summit, a sudden blizzard descended upon the mountain, engulfing me in a swirling mass of snow and ice. I struggled to find my way through the whiteout conditions, the biting cold in my bones. As I searched for shelter with each step, the snow grew deeper and the wind are threatening to sweep me off the mountain and into the abyss below, but I refused to give up, determined to find a way to survive the storm. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I stumbled upon a group of stranded climbers huddled together in the snow. Relief flooded through me as I realized that I wasn't alone in the storm. But as I approached, a sense of unease settled over me. There was something strange about the way they looked at me, their eyes, holding, calculating, as they assessed me from head to toe. Panic surged through me as I realized that they were not here to offer me shelter. They were here to take advantage of my vulnerability. I knew I had to find a way to escape before it was too late. With trembling hands, I searched for a way out. But the blizzard raged on around me, obscuring my vision and disorienting me in the light-out conditions. I could feel the weight of their gaze bearing down on me, as if they were waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But just as I thought things couldn't get any worse, one of the climbers loomed forward and grabbed me by the arm, his like a vice around my wrist. Panic surged through me as I struggled to break free, but he was too strong, his fingers digging into my flesh like talons. With every ounce of strength I had left, I fought against him, kicking and thrashing as I tried to break free from his grasp. But he held on tight, his sepia unhealing, as he tread me towards the edge of the cliff. Desperation surged through me as I realized that he intended to throw me off the mountain and into the abyss below. I knew I had to find a way to escape, to outsmart him and find a way to survive. The deadly game he was playing, with adrenaline coursing through my veins. I summoned every ounce of strength I had left and managed to break free from his grasp, and then, with a burst of speed, I raced away from the edge of the cliff and into the safety of the storm. But even as I fled, I knew that I couldn't help run them forever. I needed to find a way to outsmart them, to use my knowledge of the mountain to my advantage with every step. I searched for a way out, my senses on high alert. As I navigated the treacherous terrain, every gust of wind, every crack of thunder sent a jolt of fear through me as I raced against time to escape the clutches of the stranded climbers with sinister intentions. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I caught sight of a narrow passageway up ahead, a glimmer of light shining through the darkness like a beacon of hope. With renewed determination, I pushed myself towards it, ignoring the pain and exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm me. And then finally, I burst through the surface and into the open air, gasping for breath. As I emerged from the depths of the blizzard, I collapsed onto the snow-covered ground, exhausted and shaken, but alive. I had escaped the clutches of the stranded climbers with sinister intentions, but the memory of that terrifying encounter would haunt me for the rest of my days. It was a stark reminder of the dangers that lurk in the unforgiving wilderness, waiting to ensnare those who dare to venture to. The road stretched out endlessly before me, winding its way through the heart of the countryside. As I drove on my cross-country road trip, I had been traveling for days, exploring new destinations and scouting for potential spots to recommend to my clients back home. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape, I decided it was time to find a place to rest for the night. Spotting a quaint bed and breakfast nestled on the outskirts of a small town, I pulled into the gravel parking lot and parked my car. The building looked charming and inviting, its warm lights glowing softly through the windows as if beckoning me inside. Stepping out of the car, I stretched my tired limbs and made my way to the front door, the crunch of gravel beneath my feet echoing in the stillness of the evening. As I entered the inn, I was greeted by the warm aroma of home-cooked food and the sound of soft music playing in the background. The innkeeper, a kindly-looking woman with silver hair and a worn smile, welcomed me and showed me to my room. It was cozy and inviting, with floral wallpaper and a plush bed that looked like it would be perfect for a good night's sleep. As I settled in for the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the end. There was an air of secrecy about the place, a feeling that there were hidden depths lurking beneath its charming exterior. Unable to shake my unease, I decided to do a little exploring, slipping out of my room. I made my way down the narrow hallway, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. As I came to a staircase leading down to the basement and hesitated for a moment before descending into the darkness below. The air was cool and musty, and I felt a shiver run down my spine as I stepped into the dimly lit room below. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw rows of shelves lining the walls, each one stacked with jars filled with strange, unidentifiable substances. My heart began to race as I realized that I had stumbled upon something sinister, something that I was never meant to see. Before I could make sense of what I was seeing, I heard footsteps echoing in the darkness behind me, whirling around. I saw the innkeeper standing in the doorway, her smile replaced by a cold, calculating expression. I knew then that I was in danger, that I had stumbled upon something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I turned and fled, racing back up the stairs and out into the night. As I sprinted across the parking lot to my car, I heard the sound of pursuit behind me, the innkeeper's voice calling out for me to stop, ignoring her cries. I fumbled with my keys and threw myself into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut behind me and locking it tight with trembling hands. I started the engine and peeled out of the parking lot, leaving the bed and breakfast far behind me. As I drove into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me, the fear that I had narrowly escaped a fate far worse than anything I could have imagined. But one thing was for sure: I would never forget the terror of that night, the feeling of being hunted like prey in the darkness of that quaint little inn. I'm a retired soldier, been through my fair share of battles, but nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered on that road trip through the Appalachian Mountains. I was on a mission, you could say, a mission to confront my past, to come to terms with the things I'd seen and done during my time in the military. But as I drove deeper into the mountains, I started to feel like I was being watched, like there were eyes on me from every direction. I tried to shake off the feeling and focus on the road ahead, but it just kept getting stronger. And then, out of nowhere, I stumbled upon a group of people camped out in the woods. At first I thought they were just hikers or something, but as I got closer, I could see that they were armed to the teeth and wearing some kind of uniform. I should have turned around and hightailed it out of there right then and there, but something inside me told me to stay and find out what was going on. So I parked my car and approached them cautiously, trying to keep my guard up. Despite the sinking feeling in my gut, they didn't seem hostile at first, just a bunch of guys talking about survival tactics and preparing for the end of the world. But the longer I stayed, the more I started to realize that something wasn't right. There was this tension in the air, like they were all waiting for something to happen. And then one of them pulled me aside and whispered something about a can they like to play. I didn't know what he was talking about at first, but then he started going on about how they like to hunt people for sport, how they were waiting for the perfect prey to come along. I tried to play it cool and act like I was interested, but inside I was freaking out. I knew I had to get out of there before they realized who I really was, so I made up some excuse about needing to get back on the road and said my goodbyes, but as I turned to leave, I could feel their eyes boring into my back. I made it back to my car and peeled out of there as fast as I could, not stopping until I was miles away from the creepy campsite. I tried to put it out of my mind and focus on my original mission, but I couldn't shake the feeling that those survivalists were still out there waiting for their next victim. I kept driving, pushing deeper into the mountains in search of answers. But everywhere I went, it felt like they were one step ahead of me. I started to feel like I was losing my mind, like I was trapped in some kind of twisted nightmare. But I refused to give up, refused to let those psychos get the best of me, and then, just when I was starting to lose hope, I stumbled upon a group of park rangers out on patrol. I told them everything about the survivalists and their sick game. They didn't waste any time launching an investigation, and before I knew it, they had rounded up the whole group and put them behind bars. I breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that I had done my part to put an end to their reign of terror. I'm a single mum, right, and I'm just trying to take my daughter on a road trip to visit some family in the Ozarks. Seemed like a good idea at the time. You know, but let me tell you, things took a turn real quick. We're driving along this desolate country road. Just me and my daughter, enjoying the scenery and listening to some tunes. But then we take a wrong turn, and before we know it, we're completely lost. I try to keep calm, you know, for my daughter's sake, but deep down, I'm freaking out. I mean, we're in the middle of nowhere, with no surface, and no idea where we are, and just when. I think things can't get any worse. We come across this creepy-looking compound in the middle of the woods. I mean, it's like something out of a horror movie. I try to turn around and get the hell out of there. But before I can even put the car in reverse, we're surrounded by these people. And let me tell you, there's something off about them, something not quite right. They're all wearing these weird robes and chanting in some language I've never heard before, and when they see us, they start moving towards the car like they're about to do something terrible. I lock the doors and tell my daughter to stay quiet, but she's scared out of her mind. And honestly, so am I. I mean, what the hell are we supposed to do? But then, just when it looks like we're done for, we hear this voice coming from the woods. It's a man's voice, and he's telling us to follow him if we want to live. I don't know what else to do, so I throw the car in to drive and gun it, following the voice deeper into the woods. And let me tell you, it's the scariest thing I've ever done in my life, but somehow we make it out of there alive. We're shaking and covered in sweat. But we're alive, and as we drive away from that place, I can't help but feel grateful for whatever or whoever it was that saved us. We make it to our family's place in the Ozarks. And I don't think I've ever been so relieved to see them. I tell them about what happened, but they just look at me like I'm crazy. But I know what I saw, and I know what we went through, and let me tell you, I'll never forget it for as long as I live. So yeah, that road trip didn't exactly go as planned. But in the end, we made it out alive, and that's all that matters. Picture this. I'm on this backpacking trip through Europe, just trying to see as much of the continent as I can. I've been traveling for weeks, hopping from one city to the next, and everything's been going great so far. But then I decide to take this detour through the countryside of Eastern Europe. I mean, I've heard it's beautiful out here, with all the rolling hills and quaint little villages. So I figure, why not check it out? I'm tracking along these winding roads, just enjoying the scenery, when suddenly I realize that I have no idea where I am. I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere along the way, because none of this looks familiar. I start to panic a little. I mean, I'm out here all alone, with no cell service and no way to contact anyone for help. But then I see this village up ahead, nestled in a valley between the hills, and Figured maybe I can stop there and ask for directions. As the first thing I notice is how quiet it is. I mean, there's no birds chirping, no dogs barking, nothing. It's like the whole place is dead silent. I start walking down the street, calling out for anyone who might be around, but there's still no answer. It's like the village is completely abandoned, like everyone just up and left in the middle of the night. But then, just as I'm starting to get really creeped out, I hear this sound coming from one of the houses. It's like a faint scratching noise, like someone's trying to get out. I follow the sound to this old rundown cottage at the edge of the village, and I can see that the door is cracked open just a little bit. I don't know why, but something compels me to go inside. I figure maybe someone's in trouble and they need my help, so I push open the door and step inside, and that's when I see them, these people huddled together in the corner of the room, their eyes wide with fear. I try to ask them what's wrong, but they just stare at me like I'm some kind of monster, and that's when I notice something else. There's this smell in the air, this sickly sweet smell that makes my stomach churn. I realized that something's not right here, that maybe I should get out while I still can. But before I can even turn around, I hear this voice behind me, low and menacing. I spin around, and there's this guy standing in the doorway, blocking my only way out. He's tall and lean, with this wild look in his eyes that makes my blood run cold. He starts talking to me, but I can't even make out what he's saying. It's like his words are coming from some other place, some other time, and all I can focus on is the fear twisting in my guts. I try to run, but he's faster than me, and before I know it, he's cracked me by the arm and drag me out of the cottage and into the street. I struggle against him, but he's too strong, and soon I'm surrounded by these other people, all of them staring at me with those same wide, terrified eyes. I realize then that I'm in serious trouble, that these people aren't going to let me go without a fight, and that's when I know I have to do something, anything, to get out of here alive. So I fight with everything I've got, lashing out of my captors with fists and feet, screaming for help at the top of my lungs, and somehow, against all odds, I break free. I push past them and run as fast as I can, not stopping until I'm back at my car with the engine running in the tires, squealing as I peel out of that cursed village and back onto the open road. I don't know what happened to those people or why they were so hell on keeping me there, but I do know one thing. I'll never forget the terror of that day, the feeling of being hunted like an animal in the dead of night, and I'll never take another solo road trip through the countryside of Eastern Europe again. So me and my dad were on this road trip down south, just trying to bond and spend some quality time together. We've been driving for hours, and we were both pretty tired, so we decided to pull off the highway and find a place to rest for a bit. We come across this small town that's not on any of the maps, which is kind of weird, but we figure it's just one of those off the beaten path kind of places anyway. We pull into the main street, and it's like something out of a movie, all dusty old buildings and tumbleweeds rolling down the road. We spot a little diner on the corner and figure it's as good a place as any to grab a bite to eat and stretch our legs. But as soon as we walk in, we can tell something's off. The locals all stop what they're doing and just stare at us like we're some kind of aliens or something. My dad tries to strike up a conversation with the waitress, but she just gets in this cold, dead-eyed stare and goes back to wiping down the counter. It's like nobody wants us there, like we're not welcome in their little town. We try to ignore the weird vibes and order some food, but it's like the tension in the air just keeps getting thicker and thicker. I can feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up as we sit there trying to eat our meat in peace. But then things start to escalate. One of the locals starts muttering under his breath, and before we know it, the whole diner is buzzing with whispered conversations and furtive glances in our direction. My dad tries to keep things light cracking jokes and trying to make conversation with the other patrons. But it's like nobody wants to engage with us. It's like we're intruders in their little world, and they're not too happy about it, feeling more than a little uncomfortable. We finish our meal as quickly as we can and head back out onto the street. But as we're getting into the car, I catch sight of a group of locals gathering on the corner of their eyes. Following us as we drive away, we both breathe a sigh of relief as we leave the weird little town behind us. But the whole experience leaves a bad taste in our mouths. We never did figure out what was going on there, but one thing's for sure, we won't be stopping in any more mysterious towns off the beaten path. Not if we can help it anyway, alright? So I got to tell you about this messed up thing that happened. To me, I was just minding my own business, doing my usual thing as a mechanic, when I got this distress call from some stranded person on this remote road. Now normally, I wouldn't bother with stuff like that. But it was late, and I guess I felt bad for whoever it was, so I H'd in my truck and head out to find this person. The road was deserted, and the whole scene had this eerie vibe to it, like something straight out of a horror movie. But I shrugged it off, thinking it was just my imagination, playing tricks on me anyway, after what felt like forever. I finally spot the car up ahead. It was just sitting there on the side of the road, all alone in the darkness. I pull up behind it, expecting to see someone waving for help or whatever, but there's nobody. There's no sign of the driver anywhere now at this point. I'm starting to get a little freaked out. I mean, where the hell did this person go? So I decide to take a closer look around the car, see if I can find any clues or something. And that's when things start to get really messed up. I notice these weird marks on the ground, like someone had been dragged away from the car. My heart starts racing as I followed the trail, my mind racing with all sorts of crazy thoughts. I eventually come to this clearing in the woods, and that's when I see it. There's this old run-down shack sitting there in the middle of nowhere, and it looks like something straight out of a horror movie. I swear I could feel my blood run cold as I slowly approached the place. But I had to know what was going on, so I muster up all the courage I have and go inside, and let me tell you why I found in there was straight up nightmare fuel. The walls were covered in all sorts of messed up stuff, like creepy drawings and symbols that I couldn't even begin to understand. And then I see it. There's this makeshift altar in the center of the room, surrounded by candles and other weird crap at this point. I'm freaking out. I know I need to get out of there, but it's like I'm frozen in place, unable to move, and that's when I hear it, this low, guttural growling coming from somewhere. In the darkness, I don't waste any time. I turn and bolt out of there as fast as I can, my heart pounding in my chest. The whole time I don't stop running until I'm back at my truck, and even then I don't feel safe. I peel out of there as fast as my truck will go, not stopping until I'm miles away from the god-forsaken place. It took me a while to calm down after that, and even now I still can't shake the feeling that something truly evil was lurking out there in those woods. So yeah, that's my story. Take it for what it's worth, but just know that if you ever find yourself on a deserted road in the middle of nowhere, you better think twice before stopping to help someone out. You never know what kind of nightmare you might stumble into. I'm Sarah, and I love exploring the great outdoors. So when I decided to take a road trip through the desert southwest, I was beyond excited. The vast expanse of the desert stretched out before me, promising adventure and excitement at every turn. As I drove along the dusty desert roads, I couldn't help but marvel at the rugged beauty of the landscape. But as the sun began to set, I realized that I needed to find a place to rest for the night. That's when I spotted a small gas station up ahead, its neon sign flickering in the fading light. I pulled into the parking lot and stepped out of my car, stretching my legs after the long drive. As I walked towards the gas station. I noticed a group of locals gathered around a table, outside, their eyes following me with a suspicious glare. I tried to ignore their stares as I had it inside to pay for my gas. But as I approached the counter, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The attendant behind the counter eyed me warily, his expression unreadable as he took my payment, feeling uneasy. I quickly grabbed my receipt and headed back to my car, eager to put some distance between myself and the strange locals. But as I turned to leave, I found myself face to face with the group of locals from outside, blocking my path with menacing looks on their faces. My heart began to race as I realized that I was trapped, surrounded by strangers in the middle of nowhere. I tried to push past them, but they only tightened their GP, their hands reaching for me with malicious intent. Panic surged through me as I fought to break free, but the group was too strong, overpowering me with their sheer numbers. I screamed for help, but the desert swallowed my cries, leaving me alone with my terror, desperate for escape. I lashed out with all the strength I had, landing blows against my attackers as I fought for my freedom. But they were relentless, their tightening with each passing moment. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw a glimmer of light in the darkness, the headlights of an approaching car with renewed determination. I fought my way towards the vehicle, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I stumbled towards safety as the car pulled up beside me. I flung open the door and tumbled inside her, leaf flooding through me as I realized that I was finally safe. The driver, a kind stranger, wasted no time in speeding away from the gas station, leaving the group of locals behind in the dust as we drove toward civilization. I couldn't help but reflect on the terrifying encounter I had just endured. The desert may be beautiful, but it's also a harsh and unforgiving place, filled with dangers lurking in the shadows. Me and my husband were on this road trip along the California coastline, just trying to enjoy some quality time together after our wedding. We're driving along these winding roads, the ocean stretching out beside us, and everything's going great. I mean, the scenery is stunning, the weather's perfect, and we're both feeling really happy. But then out of nowhere, we see this guy on the side of the road hitchhiking. Now normally, I wouldn't think anything of it, but there's something about this guy that sets off alarm bells in my head. He's got this wild look in his eyes, like he's not all there, you know, and he's waving his arms around like he's trying to flag us down, like he's desperate for a ride. My husband, being the kind-hearted guy he is, he pulls over to see if the guy needs help. But as soon as the guy gets in the car, I can tell that something's not right. He's fidgeting in his seat, looking around like he's expecting something to jump out at him. And then he starts talking in this low, raspy voice that sends shivers down my spine. He's saying all kinds of crazy stuff about how he needs to get to the next town because he's being chased by some people who want to kill him. And I'm just sitting there, frozen in my seat, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. But then things start to get really weird. The guy starts reaching into his pockets, pulling out these knives and other weapons, and my heart starts pounding in my chest. I can see the fear in my husband's eyes, but he's trying to stay calm, trying to reason with the guy and get him to put the weapons away. But it's like the guy is not even listening to us. He's just ranting and raving, waving his weapons around like he's ready to use them at any moment. And that's when I know that we're in serious danger, that this guy isn't just some harmless hitchhiker looking for a ride. He's a threat, a real threat, and we need to get away from him as fast as we can. I start pleading with my husband to drive to get us out of there before it's too late, and finally, thank God, he listens to me, slamming his foot down on the gas pedal and speeding away from the crazy hitchhiker as fast as the car will go. I can hear the guy yelling behind us, screaming threats and curses as we disappear into the distance. But I don't care. All I care about is getting as far away from him as possible, and making sure that me and my husband are safe. We try for what feels like hours, the adrenaline pumping through our veins as we put as much distance between us and the hitchhiker as we can, and finally, when we're sure that he's nowhere near us anymore, we stop the car and catch our breath. We sit there in silence for a while, both of us trying to process what just happened. And then my husband turns to me, his eyes filled with concern, and he asks me if I'm okay, and I nod, because even though I'm still shaking with fear, I know that we're safe now, that we made it out of that nightmare alive. But even now, weeks later, I still can't shake the memory of that deranged hitchhiker, and the terror of knowing that our lives were in his hands. It's a road trip. I'll never forget, for all the wrong reasons, I was on mission traveling to a remote desert town to investigate reports of strange occurrences. My heart pounded with excitement and trepidation as I navigated the dusty roads, the vast expanse of sand stretching out endlessly around me. As I arrived in the town, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me. Like a heavy blanket, the streets were deserted, the buildings crumbling and abandoned, and an eerie silence hung in the air undeterred. I'd set out to interview the locals, hoping to uncover the truth behind the rumors that had brought me here. But as I spoke with them, I quickly realized that there was something deeply wrong with this place. The townsfolk were wary and guarded, their eyes flickering with fear. As they spoke in hushed whispers, they told me of strange lights in the sky, of mysterious disappearances, and of a pervasive sense of dread that hung over the town. Like a dark cloud, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, I delved deeper into my investigation, scouring old newspaper archives and interviewing anyone who would talk to me. But the more I've learned, the more terrified I became. I uncovered reports of secret government experiments, of shadowy figures lurking in the desert, and of a hidden underground facility where unspeakable horrors were said to take place. As I pieced together the puzzle, I realized that I had stumbled upon something far more sinister than I had ever imagined. The town was a hotbed of conspiracy and intrigue, and I was in way over my head. But I couldn't turn back now, couldn't abandon my quest for the truth. So I pressed on my nurse freight, and my senses on high alert as I delved deeper into the darkness. I began to attract unwanted attention. Strange men in suits began following me, their eyes cold and calculating as they watched my every move. I knew that I was in danger, that I had stumbled upon something that powerful people would kill to keep hidden. But I refused to be intimidated, refused to let fear dictate my actions with every step. I took the noose tightened around my neck, the shadows closing in around me like a vice. But I refused to back down, refused to let them silence me. Finally, I uncovered the truth, a horrifying revelation that shook me to my core. The town was a testing ground for a top-secret government project, a place where human lives were expendable and morality was a distant memory. But as I raced to expose the truth, I found myself trapped in a web of lies and deception, with nowhere to turn and no one to trust. I was alone, hunted by forces far beyond my comprehension. With nowhere left to run, I made a desperate gambit, broadcasting my findings to the world in a last-ditch effort to expose the truth. And as I waited for the inevitable backlash, I praised myself for the storm that was about to descend upon me. But to my surprise, help right in the form of a group of brave activists who had been monitoring my broadcasts. Together we fought back against the forces of darkness, shining a light into the darkest corners of the conspiracy. In the end, justice prevailed and the truth was revealed for all to see. But the scars of my ordeal will never fully heal, and I know that I will never truly be free from the horrors that I uncovered in that remote desert town. The storm raged outside, the wind howling through the trees, and the rain pelting against the windows of my remote cabin. In the woods, I huddled by the fireplace, the flames casting flickering shadows across the walls. As I tried to ward off the chill that seeped in through the cracks, with each crash of thunder, my heart pounded in my chest. The darkness outside seeming to press in on all sides. I was alone miles from the nearest town, with no one to turn to her help. But things took a turn for the worse. As the hours passed, the power flickered and died, plunging the cabin into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hand shaking as I struggled to find it in blackness, but as I swept the beam of light around the room, my heart skipped a beat as I caught sight of movement outside the window. A figure stood in the darkness, their silhouette illuminated by the flash of lightning that split the sky with a surge of adrenaline. I rushed to the window and peered out into the night, my breath catching in my throat as I realized I was now alone. The figure was gone, vanished into the storm as quickly as they had appeared. But as I turned away from the window, a sense of unease settled over me like a heavy blanket. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was out there. In the darkness, watching, waiting with a shiver, I retreated to the safety of the fireplace, the flames offering the only source of warmth and light in the cabin. But no matter how hard I tried to push the thought from my mind, I couldn't escape the feeling of being hunted, of being prey in a game I didn't understand. As the night wore on, the storm raged outside, the wind howling, in the rain pounding against the roof. I huddled by the fire, my senses on high alert, listening for any sign of danger. But as the hours passed, exhaustion began to weigh heavily on my eyelids, and I found myself drifting off to sleep, despite my best efforts to stay awake. I awoke to the sound of footsteps outside the cabin, the noise echoing through the darkness like a distant drumbeat with a jolt. I sat up, my heart racing as I strained to listen for any sign of the intruder's approach, but the footsteps grew fainter, fading away into the night, until all that was left was a sound of the storm raging outside. With a sigh of relief, I realized that the danger had passed at least for now. But as I settled back into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone was out there in the darkness, biding their time until the perfect moment to strike. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I knew that I had to leave the cabin and seek help before it was too late. With a sense of urgency, I packed my things and prepared to make a run for it, hoping that I could reach safety before the storm returned. But as I stepped outside, I froze in my tracks, my blood running cold as I caught sight of the figure standing in the clearing ahead. They were tall and shadowy, their features obscured by the darkness. As they watched me with eyes that seemed to gleam in the dim light, with a surge of fear, I turned and fled into the woods, my heart pounding in my chest. As I ran for my life behind me, I could hear the sound of pursuit, the footsteps echoing through the trees as my unknown ascent closed in. But I refused to give up pushing myself, to run faster, to keep moving forward no matter what. And as I emerged from the woods, I saw the lights of civilization ahead, a beacon of hope in the darkness. With one final burst of energy, I raced towards safety, the sounds of pursuit fading away behind me. As I reached the safety of the town, I collapsed to the ground, exhausted, but alive, grateful to have escaped the darkness of the woods and the unknown terror that lurked within. I was home alone for the weekend, while my parents were away, and I was looking forward to having the house too. Myself, it was a typical suburban house with nothing out of the ordinary, and I felt safe and comfortable there. As the evening rolled around, I decided to relax in my room, scrolling through my phone and listening to music. Everything seemed normal until I received a text message from an unknown number. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was probably just a wrong number or a spam message. But then I read the contents of the message and a chill ran down my spine. The message was simple but chilling. "I'm watching you." I felt my heart race as I looked around my room, suddenly feeling exposed and vulnerable. Who could be sending me such a creepy message, and how did they know? I was home alone. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease and convinced myself that it was just a prank. But then another message came through, this time more sinister than the last. "I know you're alone. You should be scared." My hands were shaking as I typed out a response, demanding to know who was behind the messages. But there was no reply, just an eerie silence that seemed to stretch on. Forever, I felt a growing sense of dread as I realized that whoever was sending the messages wasn't just playing a harmless prank. They were actively threatening me, and I didn't know what to do. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them that I was receiving creepy text messages from an unknown number? It sounded ridiculous, and I didn't want to waste their time. Instead, I decided to barricade myself in my room, locking the door and pushing a heavy dresser in front of it. I felt a little safer knowing that I had taken some precautions, but the fear still gnawed me as the night wore on. I tried to distract myself by watching TV and reading a book, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the house and every rustle of the wind outside sent my heart racing. Then, just as I was starting to relax a little, another text message came through, the one more menacing than the last. "You can't hide from me. I'm coming for you." I felt a wave of panic wash over me as I realized that whoever was sending the messages wasn't just trying to scare me, they were planning something far more sinister, and I was their target. I considered calling the police again, but I knew that I couldn't wait for them to arrive. I needed to get out of the house to find somewhere safe where I could call for help with shaking hands. I unlocked the door and crept out into the hallway, trying to move as quietly as possible. Every creak of the floorboard sounded deafening in the stillness of the night, and I was sure that whoever was after me could hear every sound. I made my way downstairs, my heart pounding in my chest as I reached for the front door. But just as I was about to open it, I heard a noise behind me, a soft footstep that sent a shiver down my spine. I turned around slowly, my breath catching in my throat, as I saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was a man, his face obscured by the darkness, but I could feel his eyes on me, cold and unfeeling. I wanted to scream, to run as fast as I could, and never look back, but fear held me, rooted to the spot, and I could only watch in horror as the man stepped forward into the light. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone, disappearing into the darkness. Without a trace, I stood there for a moment, my heart still racing, before finally gathering the courage to run out the front door and into the safety of the night. I didn't stop running until I reached the neighbor's house, or I pounded on the door until they answered. I must have looked a mess, my hair disheveled and my eyes white with fear, but they didn't ask any questions. They just let me in and called the police. The officers arrived a short time later, and I told them everything that had happened, from the chilling text messages to the mysterious figure in the shadows. They promised to investigate, but I could tell that they didn't take these seriously. In the end, they never found out who was behind the messages or what their intentions were, but I know one thing for sure: I'll never forget the terror of that night. I had been driving for hours, the monotony of the journey broken only by the occasional flicker of my headlights illuminating the darkened forest on either side of the highway. As I rounded a bend in the road, I saw something up ahead, a figure standing by the side of the road, waving frantically in the darkness. My heart skipped a beat as I slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road, my headlights casting a pale glow on the figure's face. I rolled down the window and called out to the person, asking if they needed help. But as they stepped into the light, I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something off about them, something that sent alarm bells ringing in the back of my mind. Their eyes were wild and unfocused, darting back and forth as if searching for something unseen. Their clothes were dirty and torn, and there was a wild, desperate look in their eyes that made my blood run cold against my better judgment. I stepped out of the car and approached the person, asking them what was wrong, but instead of answering, they launched at me, their hands reaching out as if to grab hold of me. Instinct took over, and I scrambled back to my car, slamming the door shut and locking it behind me. The person pounded on the windows, their screams echoing through the night. But I refused to let them in. My heart pounding in my chest as I fumble for my phone with shaking hands. I dialed 911 and reported the incident, my voice trembling. As I described the person's AR behavior, the operator assured me that help was on the way. But as I waited for the police to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me like a heavy fog. Minutes stretched into hours as I sat in the car watching the figure pace back and forth. In the darkness, it was as if they were waiting for something, biting their time until they could make their move, and then just when I was beginning to lose hope, I saw the flashing lights of a police car approaching in the distance. Relief flooded through me as I watched them pull up beside me, the officer stepping out of the car and approaching the figure with caution. I watched as they wrestled the person to the ground, their screams echoing through the night as they were handcuffed and placed in the back of the police car. It was only then that I allowed myself to breathe a sigh of relief, the tension draining from my body, as I watched the car drive away into the night. As I sat there in the darkness, waiting for the adrenaline to work off, I couldn't help but wonder what had driven that person to such desperate measures. It was just another night on the job for me, responding to emergency calls as a paramedic. But little did I know this call would lead me straight into a nightmare. The call came in around midnight, reports of a car accident in a remote area on the outskirts of town. Without hesitation, I jumped into my ambulance and raced to the scene, adrenaline pumping through my veins. As I arrived at the location, I immediately sensed that something was off. The scene was eerily quiet, with no sign of any vehicles or injured individuals in sight. But before I could radio for backup, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. I turned around to see a group of people emerging from the darkness, their faces obscured by the shadows. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized that these were not the injured victims I had been expecting. They were criminals, and I had walked right into their trap. Before I could react, the group descended upon me, overpowering me with their sheer numbers. I struggled against them, but it was no use. They had me surrounded, and I was completely at their mercy as they bound my hands and feet with zips ties. I knew that I was in serious trouble. My mind raced with thoughts of all the horrible things they could do to me out here in the middle of nowhere, with no one around to hear my screams for help. But I refused to give up without a fight. With every ounce of strength I had left, I fought back against my captors, landing blows wherever I could in a desperate bid to break free. Miraculously, my efforts paid off, and I managed to well free from their grasp. But my victory was short-lived. As I scrambled to my feet and tried to make a run for it, one of the criminals tackled me to the ground, sending us both tumbling into the darkness as we grappled on the ground. I could feel my strength waning, the adrenaline that had fueled me now fading away, but I refused to give up, knowing that my life depended on it. With one final burst of energy, I managed to break free from the criminals and scramble to my feet, ignoring the pain pouring through my body. I sprinted into the darkness, praying that I could outrun my pursuers and find safety for what felt like an eternity. I ran blindly through the night, the sounds of pursuit echoing in my ears. But just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I saw a glimmer of light in the distance. the headlights of a passing car with renewed hope. I pushed myself to go faster, my lungs burning and my legs aching with every step and then fin. Finally, I reached the safety of the road, where I collapsed in exhaustion as the car screeched to a halt beside me. The driver, a passerby who had stumbled upon the scene, wasted no time in helping me into their vehicle and driving me to safety as we sped away from the nightmare that had unfolded in the darkness. I couldn't help but feel overwhelming gratitude for the stranger who had saved my life till the events of that night would haunt me for years to come. I knew that I was one of the lucky ones. I had survived, and as I looked back on the horrors I had faced, to never let my guard down again, knowing that danger could lurk around any corner. It was a cold, dark night. As I drove home from my late shift at work, the highway stretched out before me, empty and desolate, with only the occasional pair of headlights cutting through the darkness. But as I glanced in my rear view mirror, I noticed something unsettling, a car lurking in the shadows behind me, its headlights glaring menacingly in my direction. At first I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just another late-night commuter like myself. But as the miles ticked by and the car continued to follow me, I began to feel a growing sense of unease. I tried to lose them, weaving in and out of TR traffic and taking sudden turns down side streets in an attempt to shake off my pursuer. But no matter what I did, the car stayed right on my tail like a shadow that refused to be shaken. Panic began to rise in my chest as I realized that I was being followed by someone with malicious intent. My mind raced with thoughts of what they might do to me if they caught up, rob me, assault me, or worse. I had to think fast, had to find a way to escape before it was too late. But with each passing minute, the car seemed to draw closer, its headlights casting an ominous glow in my rearview mirror. I knew I couldn't outrun them forever, couldn't keep playing this cat-and-mouse game on the empty highway. I needed help, needed someone to come to my rescue. Before it was too late, with trembling hands, I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling over the screen as I tried to dial 911. But just as I was about to hit call, the car behind me suddenly surged forward, its headlights blinding me as it pulled alongside my own. I screamed as I caught a glimpse of the driver, a shadowy figure, their face obscured by the darkness of the car's interior. I could feel their eyes on me, cold and predatory, as they matched my speed and forced me off the road. I tried to fight back, to swerve away from them and escaped their clutches, but it was no use. The car slammed into mine with a sickening crunch, sending the Kenning off the road and into the darkness. Beyond, I felt my arc pound in my chest as I struggled to regain control of my car, the sound of metal scraping against metal filling the air as I fought to keep from crashing. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I saw the glow of streetlights up ahead, the promise of safety and salvation in the distance. With one final burst of adrenaline, I pushed down on the gas pedal and raced towards the lights, my heart pounding in my chest as I prayed the help would come in time. And then, just when it seemed like all was lost, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance growing louder and louder with each passing moment. I breathed a sigh of relief as I saw the flashing lights of a police car up ahead, the beacon of hope I had been praying for. With renewed determination, I pressed on towards them, my eyes fixed on the safety that lay just beyond my reach. And then, finally, mercifully, they were there, the police officers, leaping out of their car and moving in on my attacker with guns drawn and ready for action. I've watched in awe as they apprehended the driver there. Swift and decisive action bringing an end to my terrifying ordeal as I sat there in the darkness shaking with fear and relief. I couldn't help but feel grateful for the second chance I had been given. I was out there, just me in the woods, I set up camp in this remote clearing, thinking it was the perfect spot for the night. Everything seemed normal, just the sounds of the forest all around me, but as night fell, things started to get weird. I heard this distant drumming, like something out of a tribal ritual at first. I thought maybe it was just my imagination. But then I heard the chanting. It was faint at first, barely over the rustling of the trees, but as the night wore on, it got louder and louder, like it was coming from all around me. I tried to ignore it, to focus on getting some sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I could hear those drums pounding in my head. I started to feel the sense of unease, like I was being watched. I wanted to pack up and get out of there, but something held me back, some morbid curiosity that I couldn't shake. I tried to convince myself that it was just a bunch of locals having a party or something, but deep down, I knew there was something more sinister going on. I lay there in my tent, listening to the chanting, feeling more and more like I was in some kind of nightmare. And then just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard footsteps outside my tent. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed with fear. The footsteps grew closer and closer until they were right outside my tent, and then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they stopped. I lay there holding my breath, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The forest was silent once again, like nothing had ever happened. I don't know how long I laid there, too terrified to move. But eventually, exhaustion took over, and I must have fallen asleep when I woke up the next morning. The forest was quiet, like nothing had ever happened, but the memory of that night still haunts me, like a dark shadow lurking in the back of my mind. I packed up my camp as quickly as I could and got out of their thing, never to return to that cursed clearing again. And even now, as I sit here writing this, I can still hear the distant echo of those drums, reminding me of the darkness that lurks in the heart of the woods. The island was shrouded in mystery, its dense jungle canopy hiding secrets just waiting to be uncovered. With my trusty machete in hand, I hacked my way through the underbrush, eager to see what lay hidden within its depths. And then, just when I thought I had seen everything the island had to offer, I stumbled upon a hidden temple nestled deep, deep in the jungle. Its stone walls were covered in intricate carvings, depicting scenes of ancient rituals and ceremonies. Intrigued, I decided to explore further, eager to uncover the secrets hidden within the temple's depths. But as I ventured deeper into its corridors, a sense of unease settled over me. The air grew colder as I descended into the darkness, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the walls. I could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on me, as if the very walls of the temple were alive with ancient energy. But then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard the sound of movement up ahead, a soft rustling that sent a chill down my spine. I froze in place, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to listen for any sign of danger. And then, to my horror, I caught sight of him, shadowy figures lurking in the darkness, their eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. Panic surged through me as I realized that I was now alone in the temple. With trembling hands, I searched for a way out, but the corridors seemed to twist and turn in on themselves, leading me deeper into the heart of the temple. I knew I had to find a way to escape before it was too late. But as I searched for an exit, I stumbled upon a chamber filled with ancient artifacts, golden idols, jewel-encrusted masks, and ornate carvings that seemed to pulse with energy. It was like something out of a nightmare, a testament to the power of the curse that lay dormant within the temple's depths. Panic surged through me as I realized that I had unwittingly awakened the curse, unleashing its wrath upon myself. I knew I had to find a way to break the curse before it consumed me completely. With every ounce of strength I had left, I fought to resist the curse's influence, but it seemed to seep into my very soul, twisting and corrupting me from within. I could feel its dark power coursing through my veins, threatening to consume me entirely. But then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I caught sight of a glimmer of light up ahead, a sign that there was still a chance for me to escape. With renewed determination, I pushed myself towards it, ignoring the pain and exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm me, and then finally, I burst through the surface and into the open air, gasping for breath as I emerged from the depths of the temple. I collapsed onto the ground, exhausted and shaken, but alive. I was cruising through the desert, just me and the open road stretching out before me. The sun beat down relentlessly, turning the landscape into a shimmering mirage. I hadn't seen another car for miles. So when I spotted a minivan pulled over on the side of the road, I figured they must be in trouble. I slowed down and pulled up behind them, rolling down my window to see if they needed help. A man stepped out from the driver's seat, waving me over with a grateful smile. He looked to be in his 40s with a tired expression and a dusty hat pulled low over his eyes. As I approached, he explained that their minivan had broken down, leaving them stranded in the middle of nowhere. He gestured towards the vehicle, or a woman and 2 children, and sat waiting in the shade of a nearby rock. Without hesitation, I offered to help. I had a toolbox in the back of my truck, and I figured I could at least take a look and see if I could get their engine running again. The man thanked me profusely, relief evident in his voice. I popped out and got to work tinkering with the engine, while the family watched anxiously from the shade. It didn't take long for me to diagnose the problem: a loose wire that had come disconnect. Ed. I quickly fixed it and slammed the it shot, wiping my hands on my jeans. The man was overjoyed, shaking my hand and thanking me again and again. He insisted that I join them for dinner as a way of saying thanks, and though I was hesitant at first, I eventually agreed. After all, it was the least I could do. We piled into their minivan and set off down the road, the sun sinking lower in the sky as we drove. The man made small talk, asking me about my life and where I was headed. I answered politely, though I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. We eventually arrived at their home, a rundown farmhouse nestled in the desert. It looked like something out of a horror movie, with peeling paint and broken windows. But I brushed off my unease, chalking it up to nerves. The man led me inside, where the smell of cooking food wafted through the air. The woman and children were waiting for us at the table, their smiles wide and welcoming. But as I took my seat, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As we ate, the conversation turned to strange topics, things that didn't make sense in polite company. The man talked about his past, about how he had lost everything and had to start over from scratch. The woman and children sat in silence, their eyes fixed on me with an intensity that sent shivers down my SP. Fine, I tried to make excuses and leave, but the man insisted that I stay the night. He said it wasn't safe to drive in the dark, and that I could sleep on the couch until morning. Reluctantly, I agreed, though every fiber of my being screamed at me to get out while I still could. That night, I lay awake on the couch, the sound of the wind howling outside, the only thing keeping me company. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong, that I was in danger. And then, in the dead of night, I heard it, the sound of footsteps creeping down the hallway towards me. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat up, straining to listen for any sign of danger, and that's when I saw them, the man, the woman, and the children, standing in the doorway, their eyes cleaning with malice. They were no longer the grateful family I had met on the side of the road. They were something else entirely, something dark and twisted. Ed, I knew I had to get out of there to escape before it was too late. With a surge of adrenaline, I leaped off the couch and bolted for the door, ignoring their shouts and cries. Behind me, I sprinted through the darkness, the desert stretching out before me like an endless expanse of nothingness. I didn't stop until I reached my truck, panting and gasping for breath. With shaking hands, I fumbled for my keys and started the engine tearing out of the there as fast as I could. I didn't look back as I drove, the fear and adrenaline fueling my every move, and as the farmhouse disappeared in the rearview mirror, I knew that I had narrowly escaped the clutches of something unspeakably evil. But the memory of that night would haunt me forever, a reminder of the darkness that lurks in the most unexpected of places. I was backpacking through Europe, soaking in the sights and sounds of each new city I visited, but when I reached the mountains, I decided to take a break from civilization and go for a hike. It seemed like a good idea at the time, a chance to reconnect with nature and escape the crowds. I set out early in the morning, following a trail that wounded its way through the dense forest. The air was crisp and cool, and the sunlight filtered through the trees in dapple patterns. It was peaceful, almost serene. But as I hiked deeper into the mountains, the trails started to become less defined. Trees crowded in on either side, obscuring my view of the surrounding landscape. I pushed on, confident that I could find my way back if I needed to. But then I made a wrong turn, just a small deviation from the path, but enough to send me off course. I didn't realize it at first, too caught up in the beauty of the forest to notice that I was lost. It wasn't until hours later that I started to panic. The sun was sinking lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor. I had no idea where I was or which way to go. I tried retracing my steps, but everything looked the same. Trees stretching out in every direction. There, branches tangled and twisted together. Panic gnawed in my stomach as I realized just how lost I was. I started to walk faster, my heart pounding in my chest. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent me spiraling further into fear. I knew I had to find my way back to the trail before it was too late. But the forest seemed to stretch on forever, its depths unfathomable. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my breath coming in lagged gasps. It felt like I was being watched, like there were eyes on me from every direction. And then, just when I thought I couldn't go on, I saw it, a clearing up ahead, a break in the trees that promised safety and salvation. With renewed determination, I pushed forward, desperate to escape the suffocating grip of the forest. But as I stepped into the clearing, my heart sank. It wasn't the trail that awaited me, but a desolate expanse of rocky terrain, with no signs of civilization in sight. I sank to my knees, tears stinging my eyes as I realized the gravity of my situation. I was truly lost, with no one to help me and no way to find my way back. But even in my darkest moment, I refused to give up. With a shaky breath, I forced myself to stand and keep moving, determined to find my way out of the forest no matter what it took. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I heard it, the distant sound of voices calling out through the trees. Relief flooded through me as I stumbled towards the sound, my legs aching and my throat raw with thirst. And then, just when I thought I couldn't go on, I burst through the trees and into the arms of a group of hikers who had been searching for me. They had heard my cries for help and had followed the sound leading them straight to me. I collapsed into their arms, overcome with gratitude and exhaustion. I had made it out alive, but the memory of those dark woods would haunt me for the rest of my days. It was a regular night, just me and the flickering glow of the TV in my small townhouse. I'm a cop, so I've seen my fair share of creepy stuff. But nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen. I was just about to settle into bed when the police scanner on my nightstand crackled to life. There was a report of a break in my dress. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed my gun and badge, rushing out the door without a second thought. The drive home felt like an eternity. Every second that passed, my mind raced with possibilities. Who could be breaking into my house? Did they know I was a cop? Were they armed? When I finally pulled up to my townhouse, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I saw that the front door was wide open. I approached cautiously, gun drawn, ready for anything. Inside the house was dark and quiet. I called out, but there was no response. My heart sank as I realized the intruder could still be here, hiding in the shadows. I flicked on the lights, illuminating the living room. That's when I saw him, a figure standing in the corner, shrouded in darkness. He was wearing a ski mask, his eyes gleaming with malice. Without hesitation, I ordered him to freeze, but he didn't move. Instead, he started to laugh, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. I demanded to know who he was and what he wanted, but he just kept laughing. It was like he was toying with me, enjoying my fear. As I edged closer, gun steady in my hand, the intruder suddenly lunged at me. We grappled on the floor, fighting for control. Adrenaline surged through me as I struggled to overpower him in the midst of the chaos. I managed to get a good look at his face, and that's when I realized the truth. The intruder wasn't a stranger, he was someone. I knew someone from my past. His eyes bore into mine with a mixture of hatred and madness. He whispered my name, his voice tripping with venom. I couldn't believe it. How had he found me? How had he gotten into my house? The questions swirled in my mind as we continued to struggle. But even as fear threatened to consume me, I refused to give up. With a surge of strength, I managed to pin him down, holding him until backup arrived. When the other officers burst through the door, they found me kneeling on the floor, breathing heavily, my hands still clenched around the intruder's wrists. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. But as I looked into the eyes of the man who had tried to break me, I knew that the terror would linger long after the scars had healed. It was just like any other night. I had finished editing some photos from a shoot and decided to unwind in the comfort of my loft apartment. The soft glow of the city light seeped through the windows, casting shadows on the exposed brick walls. As I made my way to the bathroom to freshen up before bed, something caught my eye, a small black object tucked away in the corner near the ceiling. Curiosity piqued. I approached cautiously, reaching out to inspect it. My heart skipped a beat. I realized what it was, a camera hidden in plain sight, its lens pointed directly at the bathtub. Panic surged through me as I frantically searched for any more of these devices. Sure enough, I found them, hidden cameras strategically placed throughout my apartment. In the living room, the bedroom, even the kitchen, my sanctuary had been violated, and I felt exposed, vulnerable. Who could have done this? How long had they been watching me? Questions swirled in my mind as I grappled with the invasion of privacy. With trembling hands, I disconnected each camera, trying to regain a sense of control over my own space. But the damage had been done to the sense of security I once felt in my home. Shattered, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Even after removing the cameras, every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the corner of my eye sent shivers down my spine. Sleep eluded me that night. Instead, I lay awake, my mind racing with paranoia and fear. Who was behind this? Were they still watching me even now? The next day, I reached out to the authorities, filing a report and installing security measures in an attempt to protect myself. But the sense of unease lingered, a constant reminder of the violation. I had experienced days turned into weeks, and still I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I found myself avoiding certain rooms in my apartment, unable to escape the sense of paranoia that hung in the air like a thick fog. Then one night, I heard a soft staticky noise coming from the speakers of my television. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I realized what was happening. Someone was watching me through the very devices meant to keep me safe. They were taunting me, reminding me that they were still out there, still watching, still waiting. I felt sick to my stomach as I unplugged the television, cutting off the source of the intrusion. But the damage had been done. The feeling of being violated, of being exposed, lingered like a stain that couldn't be washed away. I tried to go upon my life as usual, but the constant fear nodded me, eating away at my sense of security. I couldn't relax, couldn't let my guard down for fear of what might happen if I did. Weeks turned into months, and still the surveillance continued. I found myself looking over my shoulder everywhere I went, unable to escape the feeling of being watched, even in the most mundane moments of my daily life. Then one day, I received a package in the mail, a small nondescript box with no return address. Heart pounding, I hesitantly opened it, revealing a single ominous message scrawled on a piece of paper. Inside, "You can't hide from me," it read. "I'm always watching." Terror cried me as I realized that the nightmare was far from over. Whoever was behind this was still out there, still tormenting me, still waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But I refused to be a victim. With a newfound sense of determination, I reached out to the authorities once again, fighting to put an end to the surveillance once and for all. It wasn't easy, but eventually, with the help of the police, I was able to track down the person responsible, a former acquaintance with a gauge, seeking revenge for some perceived slight. As they were taken away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The nightmare was finally over, and I could reclaim my life, my privacy, my sanity. But the scars of the experience would linger long after the cameras were gone, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edges of my reality. I woke up to the sound of the lights flickering uncontrollably in my apartment. At first, I thought it was just a power surge, but as I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and sat up in bed, I realized that something wasn't right. With a sense of unease creeping over me, I climbed out of bed and made my way to the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. Cast as I peered out into the darkness, that's when I saw it, a strange figure lurking in the shadows, their features obscured by the dim light from the flickering bulbs. My blood ran cold as I realized that I was now alone. I hesitated, unsure of what to do next. Should I confront the intruder, or should I call the police and wait for help to arrive? But as I stood frozen in the hallway, the figure turned and speared into the darkness, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my growing sense of dread. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone and dialed 911, my voice shaking as I explained the situation to the operator on the other end of the line. But as I waited for the police to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the figure was still out there lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Minutes passed like hours as I paced the hallway, my eyes darting nervously from side to side as I listened for any sign of movement outside my door. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I heard the sound of footsteps echoing through the hallway, growing louder and closer with each passing second. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that the figure was coming back, and this time they weren't alone. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest as I searched frantically for a way out. But there was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. And then, just as the footsteps reached my door, the lights flickered once more, plunging the hallway into darkness. With a sense of panic rising in my chest, I braced myself for the worst, ready to defend myself against whatever horrors lurked outside my door. But as the seconds ticked by in the darkness pressed in on all sides, I realized that the figure was gone, vanished into the night like a shadow in the wind. With a sigh of relief, I sank to the floor, my heart still racing as I struggled to make sense of what had just happened. But as I sat there in the darkness, I knew that I would never forget the terror of that night. I was out in the Australian outback, seeking adventure and excitement in the rugged wilderness. The vast expanse of desert stretched out before me, and I relished the challenge of exploring its untamed terrain. But I drove deeper into the heart of the outback. Disaster struck my car, sputtered, and died, leaving me stranded in the middle of nowhere with no one around for miles. Panic surged through me as I realized the gravity of my situation. The outback was unforgiving, and I knew that I needed to find help fast if I was going to survive with no other options. I set out on foot, hoping to stumble across a passing traveler or a nearby settlement. But as I trudged through the scorching heat, my thirst grew more intense and my energy began to wane. Just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I spotted a group of figures on the horizon. Relief flooded through me as I stumbled towards them, desperate for assistance. But as I drew closer, my heart sank. The figures were not human, but a pack of feral dingoes. Their hungry eyes fixed on me with predatory intensity. Fear cried me as I realized that I was their prey now, alone and defenseless in the vast emptiness of the outback with no other choice. I turned and fled, the sound of their snarls echoing in my ears. As they gave chase, I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest as I raced across the desert, the relentless sun beating down on me from above. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that the dingoes were close in on me there, a hot breath on my heels. With every step, my energy waned, and I knew that I couldn't keep this up much longer. I needed to find shelter, or else I would be at the mercy of the desert and its savage inhabitants. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I spotted a rocky outcrop in the distance. With renewed determination, I pushed myself forward, ignoring the burning pain in my legs, as I sprinted towards safety. As I reached the shelter of the rocks, I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath and praying that the dingo had lost my scent. But as I lay there, trembling and exhausted, I knew that I couldn't let my guard down for a moment. I huddled in the shadows, listening for any sign of danger. As the sun sank below, the horizon casting the desert into darkness, the night was long and filled with terrors. But I dared not close my eyes for fear of what might be lurking in the shadows. As dawn broke, I emerged from my hiding place, wee and shaken, but alive. The dingoes were nowhere to be seen, and I knew that I had narrowly escaped what could have been my death. I'm a musician, been on tour for a while. Now things were going pretty smooth, until my tour bus decided to break down in the middle of nowhere. And when I say nowhere, I mean a small Texas town that I've never even heard of. So here I am stranded in this deserted town with no idea how to fix the bus or when help is going to arrive. I figure I might as well make the most of it and explore the place while I wait. But let me tell you, this town gives me the creeps. The streets are empty, and the buildings look like they haven't been touched in years. It's like something out of a zombie movie. As I wander around, I start to notice something strange about the few people I do see. They're all staring at me with these blank expressions, like they're sizing me up or something. I try to brush it off and keep exploring, but the feeling of being watched just won't go away. It's like I can feel eyes on me from every direction, and then just when I think things can't get any weirder, I stumble upon this old abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. It's massive, with broken windows and graffiti covering the walls. I figure I might as well check it out, see if there's anything interesting inside. But as soon as I step through the door, I realize I've made a huge mistake. The place is pitch black, and I can hear strange noises coming from deeper inside. I try to turn back, but before I can even take a step, I feel something grab me from behind. I struggle and fight, but whatever it is, it's too strong. It drags me deeper into the darkness, and I can feel my heart pounding in my chest. I try to call out for help, but my voice is drowned out by the sounds of whatever is in there with me. And then, just when I think I'm done for, I see a glimmer of light up ahead. I fight with everything I've got, and finally, I break free and stumble out into the open air. I collapse on the ground, gasping for breath and covered in swat. I have no idea how long I was in there or what happened. But I know one thing for sure, I need to get out of this town, and fast. I scramble to my feet and run as fast as I can, not stopping until I'm back in the relative safety of the main street. But even then, I can't shake the feeling that something is still out there. Watching me, I managed to down a passing car and hit you right back to civilization. I don't know what the hell was going on in that town, and frankly, I don't want to stick around long enough to find out. I make it back to my T-bus and wait for the mechanic to arrive. When he finally does, I waste no time getting the hell out of there, putting as much distance between me and the cursed town as possible. I may never know what really happened in that place, but one thing's for sure. I'll never forget the terror I felt while I was there. And I'll be damned if I ever set foot in that town again, alright? So here's the deal. I'm a retired detective, right? And I'm just trying to enjoy my retirement by taking a road trip to visit some old friends in the Midwest. Sounds pretty chill, doesn't it? Well, let me tell you, it turned out to be anything. But so I'm driving along these quiet country roads, enjoying the scenery and reminiscing about the good old days. But then, out of nowhere, I come across this small town that just gives me the creeps. I mean, there's something about the place that feels off, you know. But being the curious guy that I am, I decide to stop and check it out anyway. I mean, what's the harm, right? Well, turns out that was a big mistake. As soon as I step out of my car, I can feel eyes on me, like I'm being watched. And when I try to strike up a conversation with some of the locals, they climb up real quick, like they've got something to hide now, being a retired detective. I've got a nose for trouble, and something about this town just doesn't sit right with me. So I start asking around, trying to dig up some dirt on what's going on, and let me tell you, what I find out is not pretty. Turns out this town is crawling with corruption and murder, and the locals are all in on it. I try to keep a low profile, but before I know it, I've stumbled onto something big, something that could blow the lid off this whole operation. But of course, that's when things start to go south. I start getting followed, threatened, you name it. It's like these people stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. I try to stay one step ahead of them, using all my old detective skills to outsmart them. But it's not easy. Let me tell you, these guys are ruthless, and they'll do whatever it takes to protect their interests. I find myself getting deeper and deeper into the thick of it, uncovering more and more evidence of their crimes. And the worst part is, I'm all alone out here with no backup to call on. But I refuse to back down. I've spent my whole life fighting for justice, and I'm not about to stop now. So, I keep pushing forward, gathering as much evidence as I can, and trying to stay one step ahead of my pursuers. And finally, after what feels like an eternity, I manage to crack the case wide open. I expose the corruption, I bring the murderers to justice. And I finally put an end to the reign of terror that's been plaguing this town, and let me tell you, it feels damn good too. Know that I made a difference, that I used my skills to uncover the truth and bring closure to the families of the victims. So yeah, maybe my road trip didn't turn out quite like I expected, but in the end, I wouldn't change a thing. Because sometimes, you've got to confront the darkness hidden, no matter how scary it might be. It was a typical night shift for me, cruising the streets of the city in my taxi, picking up fares and fing them to their destinations. But one fare I picked up that night would change everything. The call came in around midnight, a request for a pickup at a dimly lit street corner on the outskirts of town. I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, late night pickups were par for the course in my line of work. As I pulled up to the designated location, I saw a figure standing on the sidewalk, their face obscured by the shadows. They approached the taxi and climbed into the back seat without a word. There, movements stiff and deliberate. I glanced at them in the rearview mirror, but all I could see was the outline of their silhouette against the darkness. There was something about their presence that made my skin crawl, but I brushed it off as my imagination running mild. Where to? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. The passenger didn't respond immediately, and for a moment there was only silence in the car. Then, in a voice that sended chill down my spine, they instructed me to take them to our remote location, far outside the city limits. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing with thoughts of all the horror stories I'd heard about taxi drivers being lured into danger situations by unsuspecting passengers. But I pushed aside my fears and started it, the engine determined to do my job and get the fare over with as quickly as possible. As we drove deeper into the countryside, the roads grew increasingly deserted, the only light coming from the dim glow of the moon overhead. I stole glances at the passenger in the rearview mirror, but their face remained hidden in the shadows. Suddenly, without warning, the passenger spoke again, their voice low and menacing. They instructed me to pull over to the side of the road, claiming they needed to make a quick stop. My heart hammered in my chest as I complied with their request, pulling the taxi to a stop on the deserted roadside. I watched with growing apprehension as the passenger climbed out of the car and disappeared into the darkness. Minutes ticked by, but the passenger didn't return. Panic began to claw its way up my throat as I realized I was alone on a deserted road in the middle of nowhere, with no idea what was happening. Just as I was about to abandon the taxi and make a run for it, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears as I waited for whatever horror waited me. But to my relief, it was not the passenger who emerged from the darkness, but a figure clad in a police uniform. Relief flooded through me as I rolled down the window and greeted the officer, explaining the strange situation I found myself in. The officer listened intently to my story, his expression grave as he took in the details. Without a word, he instructed me to follow him back to the station, where he promised to get to the bottom of what had happened. As we drove back to the safety of the city lights, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that lingered in the pit of my stomach. What had my passenger been planning, and what horrors awaited me on that deserted road in the dead of night? Though I may never know the answers to those questions, one thing was for certain: I would never forget the terror of that night. As long as I lived, I was at home, just chilling in my suburban house, when I noticed something strange. All the clocks had stopped at exactly 3:33 a.m. I thought it was weird, but I didn't pay it much mind at first. I tried to fix them, but no matter what I did, they wouldn't budge. It was like they were frozen in time. I felt this cold chill run down my spine as I realized something wasn't right. That's when I heard it. Whispers echo into the halls. They were soft at first, like a gentle PR, but they grew louder and more unsettling with each passing moment. I tried to ignore him, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something evil in my house. I felt like I was being watched, like there were eyes watching me from the shadows. I wanted to run to get out of there and never look back, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear. I tried to call for help, but my phone was dead. I felt like I was trapped in this nightmare with no way out. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and started searching the house, trying to find any sign of the source of those whispers. But there was no one there. I felt like I was losing my mind, like I was trapped in some kind of twisted reality. I wanted to scream, to run away and never look back, but I couldn't. I was stuck there alone with those whispers echoing through the halls. I tried to block him out, but they wouldn't go away. They were like a constant reminder of the darkness. that lurked within my home. I felt like I was suffocating, like I couldn't breathe. I wanted to get out of there to escape this nightmare and never look back, but just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the whisper stopped. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, but I knew it wasn't over. I ran out of the house as fast as I could, not stopping until I was far away from there. I didn't care where I went, as long as it was far away from those whispers. I was leading this group of tourists on a camping trip in the middle of nowhere. We were deep in the forest, surrounded by towering trees and the sounds of nature. All around us, everything seemed normal, just another day in the woods. But then we stumbled upon this weird stone circle hidden among the trees. It was like something out of a horror movie, all ancient and ominous looking. I should have known better than to mess with stuff like that, but curiosity got the best of me. I started poking around the circle, trying to figure out what it was all about, and that's when things started to get weird. The air around us felt heavy, like there was something watching us from the shadows. Suddenly, one of the tourists let out this blood-curdling scream. I spun around, and that's when I saw it. This thing emerging from the trees. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, all twisted and monstrous. I tried to grab my flashlight, but my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold on to it. The tourists were panicking, screaming, and running in every direction. I wanted to run too, but I couldn't leave them behind. I shouted for everyone to stick together, to follow me back to camp. But the thing, it was right on our heels, like it was toying with us, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. We finally made it back to camp, but the thing wasn't done with us yet. It started circling around our campsite, crawling and snarling like some kind of wild animal. I knew we were in deep trouble. I tried to keep the tourists calm, but inside, I was freaking out. I didn't know what to do, how to protect them from this thing that seemed unstoppable. But then I remembered something I'd read in a survival guide once. It said that sometimes the best defense is a good offense. So I crapped the biggest stick I could find, and I charged at the thing, screaming like a madman. To my surprise, it worked. The thing hesitated, like it wasn't expecting us to fight back, and in that moment of hesitation, I swam with all my might, striking it right in the face. The thing let out this splitting screech, and then it was gone, just like that, vanished into thin air. I couldn't believe it. We actually survived. We packed up our stuff and got the hell out of there as fast as we could. I didn't stop running until we were miles away from the cursed stone circle. I don't know what that thing was or where it came from, but I do know one thing: I'm never going back into those woods again. Not if I can help it. I was alone in my cabin, just chilling after a long day of fixing cars. The night was quiet, only the sound of crickets outside. Suddenly, I heard it, a distant rumble of an engine. I peered up the window, trying to see what's up. Didn't expect to see a car coming down my driveway. At this hour, my heart started racing when I saw a bunch of figures get out of the car. They were wearing masks, creepy ones. I didn't recognize him. Panic started crawling up my spine. What were they doing here? I had this good feeling that something ain't right. I locked the door, but I could hear him outside talking in low voices. If it were up to no good, I could sense it. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. I grabbed my phone, ready to call for help, but there was no signal. Figures I was on my own. Then they started banging on the door, demanding to be let in. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it was going to burst out of my chest. I was sweating bullets, trying to stay calm. I heard him talking about breaking in. My mind was spinning, trying to come up with a plan. I couldn't just sit there and wait for him to bust through the door. I remembered I had some tools in the garage. Heavy stuff. I cracked a wrench, holding onto it like my life depended on it, 'cause it did. When they finally broke through the door, I was ready. Adrenaline was pumping through my veins as I swung that wrench, fighting for my life. It was chaos, fists flying, shouts echoing through the cabin. I managed to knock one of them down. But there was still more coming. They were relentless, like a pack of wolves. I was scared. But I wasn't going to let him win. I fought like hell, every swing of that wrench fueled by fear and desperation I could feel. Bruce's form on my body, but I didn't stop, couldn't stop. Finally, I saw my chance and bolted for the door. I ran like I never ran before, heart pounding in my ears. I could hear him shouting behind me, but I didn't look back. I made it to the woods, ducking and weaving through the trees, like my life too depended on it, 'cause it did. I didn't stop till I reached the main road, pan in, and gasped, pined for breath. I didn't look back till I reached town. The cabin was far behind me. But the memory of that night would haunt me forever. I survived. But I'd never forget the terror of being hunted in my own home for